Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler. Very curious now about this newfangled setup of, we're on camera while we host. Bill Thorpe, this is a new one for me, just as it is for a lot of people. Although I will say I've done on-camera stuff. I've hosted a web show in partnership with the Washington Examiner and whatnot, but it's a little different for me being on the radio in this circumstance.
I questioned decision-making involved in this process. I think that this was not done. It was either done at a bar late at night or by people that don't actually view us regularly. Like there's a reason that we're on the radio. There's a reason
even
we
worse,
do the TV thing.
What if it's people who don't regularly listen to the show and we're at a bar and cooked up the idea?
Yeah, that's what it was. It just seems like a really, really bad idea by somebody that was in some sort of meeting and had to come up with something and say, we've got to have some sort of a new idea, and that this was it.
Then again, there are a lot of bad ideas out there.
And
maybe this one will work out.
Yeah.
Sometimes bad ideas turn into good ideas.
Yeah, sometimes. Hey, it's not FTX yet, so who knows?
That's true. We will talk about FTX. Yeah. This is crazy. That cryptocurrency firm that is going bankrupt, their CEO and founder, Sam Bankman-Fried, was arrested just before he was supposed to testify yesterday before Congress. And it's like, what in the world is going on there when you're getting ready to give testimony before the United States House of Representatives in a committee that was prepped, that was ready to go, and then the feds arrest you and work out their arrangement with the Bahamian authorities, because that's where he's been living. This SBF, as he's known, has been living in the Bahamas, and bada boom, bada bing, they work out an arrangement, and he's been arrested.
Yeah, well, they knew where he was going to be. They grabbed him. I'm pleased that he is going to be charged, because I think too many times people in this situation are allowed leeway because, it's a lot of money involved, etc. And so I like the idea. He seems to be the next incarnation of Bernie Madoff. He seems to be that. It just seems to be just a giant Ponzi scheme. One of the things that struck me was the CEO that is now going through the books, and he's the same guy that went through Enron after it collapsed and such. He said this is probably the worst that he's ever seen in a company as far as bookkeeping, and he was surprised they used QuickBooks.
In fact, we have the clip.
QuickBooks,
let's jump right ahead and play this. Just listen to this. Former Enron, the guy who was brought in to oversee Enron during that whole debacle, now brought in to oversee FTX. And this is what he said in testimony before Congress yesterday.
The FTX group is unusual in the sense that, I've done probably a dozen large, scale bankruptcies over my career, including Enron, of course. Every one of those entities had some financial problem or another. They have some characteristics that are in common. This one is unusual, and it's unusual in the sense that literally, there's no record keeping whatsoever. It's in the absence of record keeping. Employees would communicate, invoicing and expenses on Slack, which is, essentially a way of communicating for chat rooms. They use QuickBooks. A multi-billion-dollar company using QuickBooks. QuickBooks. Nothing against QuickBooks, very nice tool, just not for a multi-billion-dollar company. There's no independent board, right? We had one person really controlling this. No independent board. That's highly unusual in a size company this is. And it's made all more complex because we're not dealing with, widgets or something that's tangible. We're dealing with crypto, and the technological issues are made worse when you're dealing with an asset such as crypto.
I mean, Bill, I am still struggling to really understand how cryptocurrency works. And as you well know, I used to host a business show when Salem owned a business station. You were my producer for 2.5 years. Yeah. And I still struggle with it, but basically we are talking about more complex kind of financial instruments, and the thing that makes this so whacked out and crazy, even beyond some of the personalities involved, is the use of QuickBooks for a multi-billion-dollar company.
I love how, I don't know who the lawmaker was, but I love how surprised she was. She's like, QuickBooks? like, wait a minute. It's kind of like my daughter uses that for her little flower shop kind of a thing. And so it's like, that's what they're using. The thing that surprised me the most was this is an investment firm.
Yes.
And I don't know, it seems that one of the first two things you'd want to do when running an investment firm would have a list of the customers and a list of the money they invested. And the second thing would be a list of where you put the money and where you invested it. It just out of the top of my head. I mean, I am not a financial genius by any way, shape, or form, but that seems to be pretty important. And the fact they had neither is really, really scary, which shows how really seat of the pants this has been. And it's been interesting because you and I, when we did work together on Business for Breakfast, everyone talked about, no, this is the new thing, and we shouldn't have the regulations because it's the regulations that are constraining the financial strength of the markets. That was the argument, that we cannot have any guardrails on this.
I don't think anybody
to grow.
was arguing that there should be no guardrails. It was that you should be cautious and limited, whereas in this case, you don't even have any.
Well, I would say that there were people that were arguing against any regulation at all inside of that market, that we shouldn't have to verify certain investments, you shouldn't have to verify certain totals, and also some of the bookkeeping. They didn't want to be held to some of the same financial rules that other investment portfolios and other investment vehicles were. And that's where I say by no guardrails. They didn't want to play by the same game because they said it was going to constrain their ability to make money. Well, yeah, because then it doesn't allow you to make a Ponzi scheme.
I mean, I would still quibble with the idea of no, but your point is still well taken. And here you have an example of, especially on something newfangled that people are, I mean, here's the big thing about FTX. What they did was use celebrities like Tom Brady and Larry David, and the list goes on. Remember, they had a massive Super Bowl commercial with Larry David that honestly was really hilarious.
Yeah, it was good.
But it misled so many people who now are completely screwed, because the thing about the cryptocurrency industry, or whatever you want to call it, is that you don't have that FDIC protection. If your investments sources go belly up, you can't go and cash in and get the money, or, then you end up with a classic run on the banks kind of scenario, which is exactly what happened. And what FTX was doing with this SBF, Sam Bankman-Fried, was taking money that had been invested by Peter, shall we say, to pay Paul, particularly their Alameda research firm, which is an affiliated trading firm, and some other sources as well. But basically, it was using investor dollars to cover other positions or other companies that you had stakes in. They had stakes in.
And the thing that you and I always talked about with crypto and working on Business for Breakfast was the fact that in many ways, crypto only succeeded as long as people in the market felt it had value, because it is just a blockchain technology, which blockchain has a lot of really, really good uses, but it is just a series of code that is strung together. And then we're saying that in and of itself has value. And now we take these little, pieces of paper here. I'm going to show the camera. We take these pieces of paper and we agree these little green pieces of paper with dead guys' pictures on them are worth money, and we exchange them for value because we agree on this type of an economy.
That's right.
But it is more amorphous when you're talking about just a string of blockchain numbers and digits and letters, and that somehow is going to represent money, and we're going to exchange it one way or another. That, for me, is a little more difficult to wrap my head around, because I can at least hold the piece of paper. Even if it doesn't mean anything, I can at least hold it as tangible. And to me, even if it goes kaput tomorrow, and all of a sudden these little green pieces of paper aren't worth a thing, at least I can burn it for heat or something. I can wallpaper the room.
You got multi-use if necessary.
Yes. Yeah, and then the digital thing for me is just evaporates. It's just gone. And that's where I think it is difficult for many people, including the dullness like myself, to wrap their heads around the idea that we are exchanging something that does not exist in the real world and giving it value.
Now, there are a lot of folks who are saying this may be a bad sign for the broader idea of crypto, because there are various types of so-called cryptocurrencies, but Bitcoin is okay. Bitcoin is still risky because you can see those massive swings in Bitcoin, but it's at least something you can invest in generally safely in terms of the vehicles that you use, the exchanges, and then you can access that currency when you want to, and it's something that's been to the extent crypto's been tried and true for over a decade now. I think there's some merit to that for folks to say, okay, maybe Bitcoin, but I mean, I'm not invested in any sort of cryptocurrencies, and I think it's a risk no matter what, but I do get the sense from folks when they say crypto, broadly extra risky, Bitcoin, just know you may have excessive valuations, but it's relatively safe as far as knowing what you're doing and being able to count that you'll be able to get your money back.
Yeah, and I understand that people have some security inside of Bitcoin because of the stability of the market. But in theory, you and I also, the little green piece of paper that we deposit into our, we have the paycheck that is automatically deposited, and then we go and we buy things online, and then you take your little plastic card, and the card allows you to swipe things at the store. So in many ways, our little green pieces of paper are already a digital form of currency.
Yes.
The thing that makes me skeptical on the cryptocurrency is the volatility. It's a lack of consistency. Mm-hmm. And to me, that volatility shows me that it is going to be very difficult to make it as a form of exchange, because if what I exchange with you is worth X in the morning and it takes a significant either dip or increase by the afternoon, whatever I've just paid for either loses a tremendous amount of value or increases. And either I've underpaid or overpaid all of a sudden. And that becomes difficult for me to figure out how to spend that in the marketplace.
I think you're absolutely right. But the thing, Bill, that I'm sort of getting at is more with Bitcoin, it seems like you can more reliably make the call for yourself and understand that the primary risk is volatility. But if you're going through some of these exchange companies that are like, that might be reinvesting your dollars to get you a bigger return, or you are looking at Ethereum or other cryptocurrencies, that's where you get a risk that is more than just the volatility that you can. I mean, there's no FDIC. Again, if your investment goes belly up, for you to be able to say, hey, I'm going to cash in on this like you could a bank, for example. Yeah, absolutely. And you and I were in that kind of crypto, and it was rising in the bubble. It was interesting because everybody was coming out with their own cryptocurrency. That was the thing. You got a cryptocurrency. You've got a cryptocurrency.
And I kind of sit there thinking, I'm sorry, but if I can just invent my own currency, I think that's just questionable. If that is what we are doing in the marketplace, and that is the vehicle, and that's what we're going to say we're going to invest in, and we can just create a new one and just say, now this is the one I'm going. I have a little bit of question in that. I don't think it's a safe market, but that's just me. I want to put FTX into perspective with some help from Alexa, who of course always sends in great texts. Oh, she's wonderful. She said, "Yep, bad record keeping. Employees submitted expense reports over chat, in particular using this program called Slack that they use in the tech industry. A random manager would accept or reject those reimbursements with an emoji. Yeah. Very few records were kept. Most decisions were made over chat, with messages automatically deleted after a certain time, and FTX had no cash management system. Maybe that's in part because you weren't dealing with cash in the same way, but no, not really, because you look at QuickBooks. They were using QuickBooks, and they were using all these tools that you shouldn't be using if you're a big investment firm like this, talking billions of dollars. But approving expense reports over a chat system with emojis, it's stunning. It is. And then you had, and we'll talk about this more in the next segment, but this was just astonishing to me. You had the testimony that was supposed to be given by SBF, the CEO and founder of FTX, and he ends up not giving it because instead he's arrested. And I'm wondering what you think that was about. I've got some thoughts of my own. We've got a couple clips on this as well, but we'll see what happens moving forward if he ever does end up testifying and what takes place. But I want to play one clip. I didn't realize that Breitbart had a finance guy, and actually a decent finance guy over at Breitbart, this guy named John Carney. And just take a listen to him putting into perspective
what exactly we saw with FTX and how it's even worse than he thought.
This was very unusual. Normally what you would do is you would invite somebody, get them sworn in, get them testifying to Congress, and then you might get perjury charges against them as well. Why go after him the day before? It didn't make any sense at all. It is far worse than I thought. What the SEC complaint, which has a lot more information in it than anything else we've seen so far, makes it clear that he was taking money, commingling accounts from the very beginning. This isn't something that just happened in 2022. He said, I had a bad month, but the SEC alleges that he has been dipping in for his own personal benefit since 2019.
Let's just say, Bill, that if you start your investment firm off commingling funds, it probably ain't going to work out so well in the end.
Yeah, not at all. And again, it's what you're allowed to do. That was part of it. Is they were pretending like it was the Wild West, and that some of the basics involved in finance didn't apply to them because they were on the forefront of this new technology. It's like, no. I'm pretty sure that, again, as we talked about early on, the basics of the investment company is you need to have a list of the people you took money from, and then you need a list of where you put the money. I mean, just at the bottom level. And the fact that didn't even exist. I'm really curious, if I was able to ask SBF a question, I would look at that and go, what were you going to do when someone came to you and asked for their money? What exactly were you going to do? How are you going to solve that problem? I don't know. This is, and how did he go out and buy all this stuff? How did he get how was he able to purchase all of these things? Was he just taking the cash from the individuals and just stealing it outright? Or was he trying to put it into some investment vehicles, that Alameda investment firm that he had? I'm just curious about where that money went and how. I would love to see that.
Well, what's fascinating, too, his right-hand woman, Miss Ellison, and
she's
SBF are both children of college professors, academics.
And very qualified academics. Then, and it looks like the woman you're talking about, I forgot her name. Yeah,
is it Allison or Christine?
I think it's Christine or something.
Allison.
That she her parents really helped her in math and computer science and things, and really kind of pushed her and gave her these opportunities. Caroline, there we go. And so they gave her all these opportunities. And in both cases, it seems like they were able to nurture their child's love of information and learning. And then something along the way went wrong. It's really weird.
Yeah.
It's really that.
You gotta wonder.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to take a break here in just a moment. And when we come back, we'll talk about the legality of this, the arrest that thwarted the testimony before Congress. But let me tell you how you can get in touch with the program. 303-696-1971 is our telephone number. You can text into the show on the 710 KNUS app on your smartphone. You can also tweet at me. I'm at Sang Center. That's Sang with an E, not an A, Center on Twitter. And a couple ways you could email yours truly directly. Of course, Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler. If you go to 710knus.com and you go to the Jimmy Sengenberger Show page, you can shoot me an email there. Of course, I host the Jimmy Sengenberger Show Saturday mornings from 6 to 9 here on 710 KNUS. And then there's my website, jimmysengenberger.com, and you can keep in mind one thing. There's no A, I, or U in Sengenberger. It's all E's all the time. Once you know that, Sengenberger is easy. And there's a contact page right there. So lots of ways to get in touch with the program. We've got lots coming up as well. In the third or fourth hour, we will be joined by a couple of Iranian-American immigrants who came here from Iran 30 to 40 years ago. We're going to talk with them about what's been happening in Iran, the significant protests that, some are calling a revolution. This is a bigger protest since at least 2009. And there was an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal yesterday from a couple of foreign policy gurus saying this could lead to the toppling of the Iranian regime. What is actually going on here, and what's the potential for that? We will talk with two special guests here in studio on that very subject in the 8 o'clock hour. We will also be joined at the top of the next hour by Aurora Mayor Mike Coffman. I know George spent a lot of time yesterday having a great conversation about homelessness and the issues of concern with Mayor Mike Coffman vis-a-vis Douglas County and so forth. We will get Mayor Coffman's thoughts on where things stand right now at 7:05. We've got many other topics to dive into as well. 303-696-1971 is our telephone number. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler. Keep it right here on Denver's local talk leader, News Talk 710 KNUS. I hope you're able to come home for Christmas. Merry Christmas, one and all. Getting close. We are 10 days away from Christmas Eve. I cannot believe it. Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler here on News Talk 710 KNUS. Gotta love the Eagles' rendition of Please Come Home for Christmas. The Wall Street Journal news piece yesterday quotes the chairman of the Securities Exchange Commission, Gary Gensler, saying the following about the CEO of this FTX cryptocurrency company, Sam Bankman-Fried, who, by the way, is the second largest donor to the Democrats in this past election cycle. Sam Bankman-Fried built a house of cards on a foundation of deception while telling investors that it was one of the safest buildings in crypto. And not only did he tell investors this, folks, this is my addition, so did Tom Brady. So did Larry David. I need to pull up the list. Giselle did so as well, Tom Brady's now ex-wife. There's a long list of famous people who clearly didn't do any due diligence, which, by the way, shouldn't this send a message to people that if celebrities endorse something, and you see a lot of celebrities endorsing something, you might want to do a little bit more due diligence because that could actually be a bad sign for whatever they're promoting.
The thing for me is that anytime I see that kind of an endorsement, I have to understand that individual is getting paid in order to deliver that message.
Exactly.
And so it's a trust issue. So do I trust that celebrity? Yes. But again, I go back to Ronald Reagan, trust but verify. So if you're interested because the celebrity says this is a great idea, good. But go out there and just do the 30 seconds worth of work to type in the company or product name and put reviews. Put the idea of, have there been complaints? Just take a minute to look as to whether or not it lives up to what the advertising is. Because just remember, the advertising is trying to make the product look incredible. It's like the Mitch Hedberg, the comedian that passed away way too early. He talked about the idea that the reason you only saw a 30-second commercial for an above-ground pool is because that is the amount of time you can have fun in an above-ground pool. After 30 seconds, there's nothing left. It's like, what are you going to do? Do I throw the ball back to Jimmy or go into the water and look at his feet? That's it. There's nothing else. So that's the idea. So understand. So, yeah.
So this is the thing, though. You would think that with something as complex as cryptocurrency, I could see a lot of people just thinking, look at the sheer number, and I'm pulling up a list here, the sheer number of celebrities who are endorsing. They can't all be just doing it simply for money. They have to have some sort of credibility behind it. Yeah. Otherwise, so many people wouldn't do it. Here's a list. Tom Brady, Steph Curry, David Ortiz, Naomi Osaka, Shaquille O'Neal, Udonis Haslem, Trevor Lawrence. Of course, those are just the athletes.
It is difficult because the idea of, it's the need for belonging. That if everybody else is doing this, they must know something you don't. And so you don't want to be left out. So you think this group, because it is so large, they must know something that you don't. However, always two things when you have that idea of wanting to belong to the group. Remember these two things. One, there are a whole lot of Las Vegas Raiders fans out there. That doesn't make them right. Also, there are a whole lot of people in the last election that voted for the candidate that you didn't want. That doesn't make them smarter than you. So remember that the idea that just because your candidate lost or just because someone else is cheering for the other team and there are lots of those fans, it doesn't mean that they're cheering for the right thing or that they're making a good decision.
Well, and hopefully this will sow the seeds of healthy distrust or that trust but verify Reagan attitude that you just referenced. For people, when they want to trust what celebrities are doing, if there are a lot of celebrities, don't just take that as, oh, this means there must be something going on here that looks good because Tom Brady and Giselle and Larry David and Shaquille O'Neal and the list goes on. They're all on this SBF FTX train. Don't just trust it or take their word for it. And hopefully this is a good lesson for people about believing celebrities and what celebrities are saying, especially when they're trying to sell a product or a service to you.
And also, the FOMO, fear of missing out. So FOMO. So the idea of people wanted to get into crypto at certain times because they were afraid of missing out. And there were stories when you and I were working together about people that would take their entire life savings and dump it into just one of the cryptocurrencies. And when that one tanked, they were sunk. I mean, they didn't even in the early stage of crypto, even if you were going to invest all in crypto, you at least should diversify to different types of crypto.
Right.
But people were doing that.
And there's one other point I think is worth making about celebrities. I mean, or people doing endorsements. You have radio hosts.
Yeah.
On this station, we do endorsements. It's the thing in radio. Yep. But here's the thing about, say, endorsements by folks in KNUS is, you know that they are able to interface directly with and get to know the people, the sponsors that are advertising on the station. You also have the opportunity to do due diligence. The sales team, our account executives, are doing due diligence. Great team over on the other side of the hall. And you can trust that word, that word is your bond when you are a host on this station doing that advertising and talking about a sponsor.
What's interesting about the hosts I've worked here and elsewhere in radio is you can tell the ones that just take the paycheck. You can tell the ones that do the work. And the ones that I've worked with here, both Peter and yourself and George, they dive into who the advertiser is. They want to make sure because, Pete Boyles has the story of a time in which they were selling a whole bunch of, they were like early versions of lock boxes and security boxes, but it was outside of a bank, and the dude stole everything. And Pete's like, ooh, after that, I have to do a little bit more work than to just say, he's going to pay us. He's going to give us a paycheck.
Exactly. 303-696-1971 is our telephone number if you want to join in to the festivities. Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler. So this guy, SBF as he's known, Sam Bankman-Fried, the CEO and founder, now former CEO and founder of FTX, this cryptocurrency firm, he was supposed to testify, but then he was arrested in the Bahamas. And that thwarted his testimony, which is going to be remote, was going to be remote. And Kevin McCarthy, the soon-to-be Speaker of the House, was on Fox Business yesterday providing some reaction that wasn't too happy about it seemed.
Kevin, do you think it was, the U.S. attorney deliberately pulled this off, made the charges, got the Bahamian authorities to put him in custody so he would not testify today? Are you inferring that?
I'm not inferring, but everybody knew he was going to testify. The chairman of the committee, the ranking member, last night it was set that he would testify now. It's interesting that this was taken up. I'm not going to refer anything, but after reading what we found now from the Twitter files and others, at least I believe it would be important to ask the question. Did anybody know? Was there any action taken? I don't know what to trust anymore from this perspective. Why would they, when all of his money goes to Democrats, why would they want him not to have to answer these questions? Why wouldn't you want the American public to know?
Now, to be clear, it didn't all go to Democrats. It did go to Republicans through other vehicles, but he was the number two, Bankman-Fried, was the number two donor to the Democrats. He primarily gave to Democrats. And he was doing so especially to virtue signal, in essence, is what he has admitted to, and playing the game. Because he was seeking certain types of regulatory packages in Congress, which is rather interesting. Isn't it? And especially when you see them go belly up and say, we got to declare bankruptcy and let's bring in the guy who was brought in to oversee Enron to oversee FTX. 303-696-1971 is our telephone number. Before we run to our break, let's go to Gary in Denver. Good morning, Gary. How are you?
Hi, Jimmy. Thanks for taking my call.
Absolutely.
I wanted to ask you a question. I've done a lot of research, and I cannot find the answer to this basic question about the nature of cryptocurrency. So here it is. At the beginning of time, there was no cryptocurrency. Someone decided, I'm going to create cryptocurrency. So initially, someone needed to fund the cryptocurrency, basically exchange cash for these cryptocurrencies in order to get the ball running. Can you explain to me who did that and when it occurred and what was the dollar amount?
Gary, that is a really good question. I do not know the answer to that question. What I do know, at least to some extent, is that this is, or I don't know this, but what I think to some extent is that it began as something through this blockchain technology that is more secure, that you're not able to, as I understand it, you're not easily able to just, you forget your password. You're kind of SOL, as they say. You need to know your logins, etc., in order to access it. It's more secure in one sense. There's more security to it. But I think what they did was create this concept of a cryptocurrency, and then they got people to buy into the idea and to put money in order to generate this notion of value. How that actually went about, I don't know, but it has to be people saying, you know what, I think this makes sense, so let's give a monetary value to this and actually participate in this concept of cryptocurrency.
And the reason, and I understand, blockchain is basically a complex equation that's secure, but the reason why I'm trying to figure out who the initial investors is, I could see that was the beginning of a plan to basically run this Ponzi scheme, and they knew that they would get out before it all happened. But for the life of me, I can't. I've Googled, I've YouTubed, and I cannot find an answer to that question.
Gary, hey, I appreciate it. I'm going to look into that a little bit more. Thank you for the call. I would say that this isn't, I'm not so sure that this would have begun, say, Bitcoin in particular, which I believe is the original cryptocurrency, or at least it's one of the originals, and it's the one that has borne out most successfully. I don't think that was intended as a Ponzi scheme so much as a way to exchange value, some kind of currency that avoids the eye of the government. This was intentional. This is why you had the libertarian-minded folks who were the first to get involved, really, in crypto, because they didn't want the eye of the government on what they were doing. They wanted something that was away from the traditional monetary system for one reason or another. And now that's coming back to bite them because it has expanded in such a dramatic way. Then you have something like FTX, where they have a multi-billion-dollar bankruptcy, and you have thousands of people who will not get their money back, full stop, because there is no FDIC. There is no regulation of any kind in this space. What do you make of that? They go into this because they don't want the regulation, because they don't want the watchful eye of government, and then the absence of any form of government regulation helps, at least it seems, to bring about significant loss of money. 303-696-1971 is our telephone number. You can also text into the show on the 710 KNUS app on your smartphone. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler. Keep it right here on Newstalk 710 KNUS.
Want to take your favorite radio station wherever you go? Well, now there's an app for that. No matter where you are, stream your favorite shows. Tap the app to listen to podcasts. Talk back to your favorite local hosts.
At the tone, leave a message.
Call the show. Set your alarm. Enter contests and win prizes. All in the palm of your hand. Available now for iOS and Android devices in the App Store or Google Play. And best of all, it's free. Download today.
Good morning, Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler here on News Talk 710 KNUS, hour number 1 flying by. I'm going to surmise the next 3 will as well. Good to be with you as we've been talking about this fascinating story regarding the cryptocurrency exchange firm FTX, where its former CEO, Sam Bankman-Fried, known as SBF, and his compatriots at the company, including this Caroline Ellison, were really engaging in what seems to be, as one listener described, a con job Ponzi scheme, where they use the likes of Tom Brady, Larry David, Shaquille O'Neal, the list goes on, for famous Hollywood celebrities and athletes that clearly couldn't resist the paycheck to advertise for FTX. And what FTX was basically doing was taking the bets that people were placing on cryptocurrency and billions of dollars worth in this firm, and then spending a lot of those proceeds on other things. Like, for example, to pay the expenses and debts of Alameda Research, an affiliated trading firm. And they would approve expense reports with emojis using chat. And they went through QuickBooks, as we learned from the guy who was brought in to oversee Enron, is then brought in to oversee FTX. And he said they used QuickBooks in a multi-billion-dollar firm, something he'd never seen before. And the chairman of the SEC, Security Exchange Commission, Gary Gensler, said Sam Bankman-Fried built a house of cards on a foundation of deception while telling investors that it was one of the safest buildings in crypto. Well, he was arrested, SBF, just in the last day or two, in the Bahamas, where he had been living, which should be a red flag, shouldn't it? Your investment guru is based in the Bahamas? Just saying, just wondering. But when he was arrested, that made it impossible for him to do the testimony he was supposed to give before Congress. Here's Professor Jonathan Turley on that on Fox News.
Well, this is the first time in my memory that prosecutors, rather than a defense attorney, stop someone from making self-incriminating statements. This was a windfall opportunity for the prosecutors. He was willing to go forward with hours of rather hostile cross-examination on every detail in the case. Why wouldn't you want that to happen? That's all admissible. He hadn't been arrested. And yet they decided to move this rather quickly, have him arrested just before he was going to take that step. He's already done great harm to himself, in my view, as a criminal defense attorney, with his public statements. But this was going to be absolutely overwhelming in terms of its benefits for the prosecutors if they let him go forward. So it left a lot of us scratching our heads. I mean, why would you do that? You could just wait for a day. Maybe they'll explain that. But they really did him something of a favor here by moving the schedule forward, because he may have just if he had been testified, he could have wrapped up the case against himself.
Yeah, that raises a big question. Why in the world did they arrest him now and not allow him to go through the testimony? I don't know. There is that conspiratorial piece that says the Democrats who controlled the committee didn't want him to testify because there would have been questions asked by Republicans about campaign donations. But I don't know that that's really what the feds were thinking about when they held off on this testimony and arrested him instead. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. Mayor Mike Coffman of Aurora. Up next, I'm in for George. Gotta love it. The man himself, Chuck Berry, kicking off the hour. Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler. Here on News Talk 710 KNUS, as it is time now for hour number 2. You know, there are so many great covers of this tune, by the way. Run, Rudolph, Run. There's a great live one by Bryan Adams. I love Kelly Clarkson's version. Jimmy Buffett has a tremendous one. I mean, it is just such a great song. Run, Rudolph, Run by the great late Chuck Berry, one of those pioneers of rock and roll. Good to be with you this morning. News Talk 710 KNUS. You know, yesterday I was listening to some of the show when George was, of course, hosting, and he spent a good chunk of time talking about the problem of homelessness, which is seemingly growing exponentially. Like, we are seeing much more of a problem in communities all over the Denver metro area and outside of the Denver metro area increasingly as well. Now, a lot of this could be attributed to policies that have gone on in Denver. There was some discussion of that yesterday. But what are you to do about the many homeless individuals and families in our communities? And in particular, what about this concern, which has been expressed lately by Aurora Mayor Mike Coffman, of homeless individuals who are being allegedly transported from Douglas County into Aurora or other places, and why that is the case? Well, let's talk about that and more with the mayor of Aurora himself, Mike Coffman, who joins me now here on 710 KNUS. Good morning, Mr. Mayor. How are you?
Hey, good morning, Jimmy. Great to be with you.
Great to have you, as always. Really appreciate you taking the time, especially on an issue that clearly has become very important to you over the past few years. Of course, we remember a couple years back when you spent a week or so during this holiday season that's coming up with Christmas and New Year's with homeless in Denver and the homeless communities, learning more about what's going on there. Before we get into the transportation of homeless individuals from DUGCO or between other counties and municipalities, what can you just kind of tell us, big picture, when you did have that experience of staying with homeless camps and so forth, what you learned from that experience?
Sure. This was the end of 2020 into early 2021, where if you were in a shelter, you had to wear a mask. So between the mask and the wool cap and my old fatigues, I was a homeless veteran in disguise. But it was an incredible experience. I think the big takeaway is how disingenuous some of these advocates are for the homeless in terms of describing their plight. And they would say, for instance, people staying in encampments stay in encampments and don't go to shelters. And these are two different universes, shelter population and encampment population, and the two rarely ever mix. But they would say that they're not going to go to the shelters because, they're concerned about their health and during a pandemic in a congregate environment in a shelter. They're concerned about having their few possessions stolen, and they're concerned about their safety, none of which was true. That I found the shelters versus, I found the shelters safe, the encampments not safe. I never got anything stolen in a shelter. I got almost everything stolen staying in encampments, and they never adhered to any of these public health protocols in the encampments where they were pretty strict in shelters. And so they lead us down this path, and also they lead us down this path that the problem with people in the shelters is born from economic circumstances, and that's simply not true. That this is a, unfortunately, and there is some mental illness, but it's exaggerated. This is really a drug crisis. This is about people driven through by addiction and crystal methamphetamine and now fentanyl, and a lot of property crime, a lot of crime associated with these encampments. This is a very tough problem, and until we define it for what it is, I don't know how we find a solution.
So, Mayor Coffman, can you describe the shelter community? Is that more consisting of families? I mean, what's the demographic from your experience, and what also is the drive or the driving reason for why people are in the shelter community? Just to really put a pin on that point, to distinguish from what your observation is about encampments.
Well, it's mostly single men, and we have other partners, nonprofit agencies that deal with homeless families. Those circumstances are very different and tend to be economic. But what I found that was interesting is I found 3 different categories in the shelters. The first was people with a small category at the top that I'll call the truly mentally ill. And obviously I'm not a mental health professional, but I think it's probably more schizophrenia than anything else. And you can't force them to take drugs if they're not an impending threat to themselves or someone else. And so, but they can navigate the system to get some resources in shelters and what I call the big middle, and those people, excuse me, that are chronically homeless, and usually in shelters there's probably more alcohol than drugs, but they tend to not be moving on. But there was a third tier at the bottom, and people that were displaced for economic reasons and were using the shelter system to get back on their feet. During the day would go out and find work, again saving money to get back on their feet and get their own place, and be able to rent an apartment or rent some place of their own. And so they were very resilient. That third category, you didn't see that third category out in the street. The street, it was just an incredible drug use, very dark life.
Aurora Mayor Mike Coffman joining us this morning. Mr. Mayor, one other question. You went to Dallas recently with others who are in this case, on the Aurora City Council, and to learn how they were managing things and what's going on in some other cities. What have you learned as far as, say, treatment first, this one concept of treatment first versus housing first?
So probably the 2 biggest there's a very big ideological divide in how we look at this issue, and so housing first would be the probably on the left, quite frankly, would be really, which is dominant in America. This philosophy is dominant in America. It says that housing is so basic to the human condition that if you resolve for housing, not through any temporary housing, but through permanent housing, what they call permanent supportive housing, like giving people an apartment for a couple of years, which they do is actually Houston, not Dallas, 4th largest city in America.
Right.
They spend $100 million a year on homelessness, giving people free apartments, essentially, for a 2-year period without any requirements placed on them. The notion that they'll change their behavior. And they claim it's very successful because they look at who they give an apartment to, and then after the 2-year period, who from that population who applies for services after that. And so they claim that the percentage is very low, and so they claim that's their success rate. But then I would ask them, I say, okay, if you say you have case management, tell me what these people are doing after 6 months. Who went to addiction recovery, who went to job training, who actually got a job, and give me a snapshot, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months after 2 years. And they say, well, why do you want to know? I just can't believe it. And so they weren't transparent. They wouldn't release that information to me. So I think, to me, that program is suspect. I went to San Antonio after that, to Haven for Hope is a program there which has a campus-like setting, and so where all the services and the partners are there for San Antonio in one location. And then Colorado Springs, actually, the rescue mission in Colorado Springs kind of mirrors that approach in San Antonio, but a little bit more conservative twist under work first model that essentially says, the goal has to get people to work. And so they have a campus there with 3 different parts, all intentionally positioned with each other, where you have the emergency shelter part, people just walking off the street, not participating in any programs, oatmeal for breakfast, sack lunch for lunch, obviously. And then, but they can see the people in the next part that are participating in mental health care and participating in addiction recovery, participating in job training, that have better circumstances, and then those people can see people in the third part of this campus where people that are working and in transitional housing that have better, more private circumstances in terms of their living situation. And so looking at really replicating the Colorado Springs model in the city of Aurora, and we have a fabulous ready-to-work program, but it doesn't have the emergency housing component. But people that truly want to change their behavior, and that's where you have to concentrate the resources. Not on everybody equally, but the people that actually want to change their behavior, want to get sober, want to get that job training, and want to go to work and be a productive member of society.
Yeah, I'm glad you clarified about Houston. I got them mixed up a little bit because in Houston you have that housing first model, and in Dallas you have that treatment first model. Again, we're talking with Aurora Mayor Mike Coffman, and there has been a controversy brewed over the last couple of weeks because of your remarks, Mr. Mayor, about Douglas County and the movement of homeless individuals into Aurora from Dougco. And you were going to take some actions in terms of a resolution before the Aurora City Council. You decided not to put that forward after further discussion with Douglas County officials. What can you tell us is going on there? Bring us up to speed on what your concerns are and how they may or may not be alleviated right now in terms of figuring out what to do and so forth.
Well, here's my hope. I mean, I think that we'll reach an accommodation with Douglas County, but and I'm having ongoing conversations with the county commissioners. But I think my concern is that there ought to be a statewide solution, and it ought to say that no jurisdiction, no local government can transport their homeless population to another jurisdiction using public resources without the consent of that local government or jurisdiction. And I think that's, as we go forward, that's important. And unfortunately, this problem seems to be growing. And, obviously I hope that our approach is going to help, find a solution to all of this. Because let me tell you, I think that this is not an economic issue. That if you look back at the Great Recession, 2008, 2009, you didn't have these, and that was an incredible economic downturn, and yet you didn't have the homeless encampments like you do today. So, but I am concerned that this practice could spread to other areas of the state, and I don't think it's appropriate.
Now, one question, this came up yesterday when George was talking with listeners about the problem of homelessness that we're facing in our communities. What if a homeless individual that is, say, in Douglas County is from another community, like they can demonstrate that they came from Aurora or they came from Denver, and maybe one of the reasons they went to Douglas County is because there aren't too many other homeless individuals there in the county, and so they decided it might be a better place for them to go. In terms of what you're suggesting about moving, having this community giving permission, the community they would want to send to homeless individuals to, say from Douglas County to Aurora giving permission, what if the individual that they identify is from Aurora?
I think that you could have nonprofit organizations work with other nonprofit organizations, but if the intent, and let me tell you, we ask people when they come to this city, we screen them and we ask, where are you from? But we provide services for everybody that comes here. And so, surely you do have we do have a family reunification program, and sometimes it's out of state where where we can connect that person to a family member that will take them and ensure that and provide transportation for them to get there. That's a policy for some of the nonprofits working in this city. But I think that the question is what is the intent? And if the intent is just that that you have no intention of providing services for these people, and you simply want to unload them somewhere else, and you create a fiction for doing so, that's where they're from, is that appropriate? And I think that it's not. As Douglas County becomes more of an urban county, they're going to have more urban problems, and so. But we're going to work with them and find a way how to deal with this.
Yeah. Do you expect a fruitful collaborative approach with the county now that you've put this issue out there and seem to be having more discussions vis-a-vis the sheriff, the commissioners, and so forth?
Well, ultimately, I think we can work out in an intergovernmental agreement, and that's what we're in discussions for right now. Because I think what the governor has said before is that he would like a regional center on the west side of the Denver metropolitan area and one on the east side of the Denver metropolitan area. So we will provide an application to the state for monies from this ARPA program. What is it? American Recovery Plan Act. That program that as the economy was improving on its own, that they decided to shower the country with local governments and state governments with money that inflated the economy. But that's another discussion for another time.
Sure.
Let me just say that we're applying for the state. But let me tell you, we're going to take a conservative work-first approach. And if the state doesn't want to fund that for a regional center under my terms here in Aurora, they can just put it somewhere else. But we're not going to do more of the same for the homeless situation because that hasn't. We know that doesn't work. And so Aurora is going under a very different path than certainly Denver is going when it comes to addressing the homeless issue, as other jurisdictions that have gone. So our path is going to be very different. I think Colorado Springs is a good model for how to deal with this issue.
Just very quickly, because I know you got to go, Aurora Mayor Mike Coffman. Just can you sum up what you believe? I know you've touched on it, but just very clearly, what is the Aurora approach as you envision it?
Well, the Aurora approach is going to be a work-first approach, and that doesn't mean that, and let me define this. So we have a program right now in the city of Aurora that I think is very successful, run by a nonprofit organization called the Bridge House, and it's called, and their iteration or their program in the city of Aurora is called Ready to Work, which we support as a city, and it's on the vicinity of, it's an office building on the vicinity of Parker in Peoria. In the city of Aurora is office building that was converted for this purpose, where they took the offices and made them dorm room, made them living quarters, where we took the conference rooms, made them classrooms, and so people that want to change their behavior come in this program. We help them get sober, but they have to commit to being sober. They start work from day one. They can certainly participate in work training programs, but the emphasis is on work. And what they do then is they pay for some of the services that they get, but they also, money is set aside from the money that they earn through working. And some of the jobs are with the city of Aurora, like our parks department, things like that, and that is set aside for them. That as they move through the program, that they will have money to be able to rent a place, to make that deposit, to do that first month's rent. And then have the job skills necessary for them to work and support themselves. And I think this is the right approach to go. Whereas if you take the housing first model, it says, no, we just have to give them an apartment with no requirements on them, and somehow they will change their behavior by giving them their own apartment, for a fairly lengthy period of time. And I just very much disagree with that approach.
One thing I have to say as we let you go, Mayor Mike Coffman, is that I appreciate the city of Aurora is really not only taking this issue seriously, but you're doing a lot of legwork. You yourself, of course, staying with homeless individuals back in 2020, 2021. We're coming up on the 2-year anniversary of that experience for you. And also visiting places like Houston and San Antonio and going down to Colorado Springs. That due diligence is crucial for a crisis situation like this. And so I'm sure many appreciate that in the collaborative discussions that are going on, because it must be addressed one way or the other. You've been very generous with your time this morning, Mayor Coffman. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. As always, my friend.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Once again, Aurora Mayor Mike Coffman joining us here on the show. Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler. We're going to take a break. When we come back, what's your reaction to that conversation? 303-696-1971. What did you take away from it? Do you think that Aurora is on the ball in terms of really addressing this? I liked the work first approach that they are taking, but is that enough? What about the issue of cross-municipal or cross-county transportation of the homeless? Mayor Coffman would like the state legislature to change the law so that local governments cannot ship homeless individuals to another jurisdiction without that community's permission. A great article summarizing this in the Denver Gazette a couple days ago by reporter Jessica Gibbs. What about that? What about his take on that? 303-696-1971. You can also text into the show on the 710 KNUS app on your smartphone. Once again, Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler. Let's take a break here on Denver's local talk leader, News Talk 710 KNUS. Welcome back. Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler here on News Talk 710 KNUS. Good to be with you. 303-696-1971 is our telephone number if you'd like to join into the festivities. So we just had Aurora Mayor Mike Coffman on the program. I thought that was a really good discussion. One thing that I appreciate about Kaufman especially, but also the Aurora City Council broadly speaking, is that he and they are really doing their homework a lot more than a lot of folks might do. I mean, Kaufman spent a week in 2020, 2021 with the homeless, experiencing shelter life and encampment life, and really learned a lot. And you can tell it that he did whenever he talks about that experience. He's visited, along with members of the Aurora City Council, Houston, to see their housing first approach, San Antonio, been down to Colorado Springs to see how they handle things, and more. And that kind of due diligence is something that I think is essential, not just for an issue like this, but in general when it comes to homelessness or other issues, to really do that kind of homework and to show people that you are doing that homework and you have a unique understanding that you can bring. Now, one of the things I found interesting is Mayor Kaufman really talked about this emphasis on work. Work as being a fundamental piece of the solution to homelessness, to get people working. It can focus their lives. It can give them a new opportunities to improve themselves, to eventually get and afford their own housing, and the list goes on about opportunities that come from working. And I just found this so consistent. So I interned for then Congressman Mike Coffman during his first term in Congress in the summer of 2010. I was a student at Regis University, and it was a great experience. I was not in D.C. I was in his district office. So that was at the time in Lone Tree, actually. Douglas County was part of the 6th Congressional District at the time. And I remember being assigned, and I don't know if they published it or what ended up happening, I can't recall. But I remember being assigned to ghostwrite an op-ed, something that I had the opportunity to do for the congressman's office as far as the projects that I was tasked to do. Because you're not in D.C., you have a different set of things that you do. And I remember this op-ed was about welfare reform in the 1990s. And I don't know if it was an anniversary that was being marked or something, but that was the subject I was asked to write about, and that's what I wrote about, the success of the work requirements of welfare reform. So I can tell you that one of the things that actually has been very consistent about Mike Kaufman for the last, that's probably 14 years at least since he was first elected to Congress, is that he has always prioritized the idea that we need to get people to work so that they can be self-sufficient. And that's something I appreciate, and I've always appreciated, because that is crucial, isn't it? To being able to improve your own life, you need to get a job, to work, to provide for yourself and your family. Otherwise, that long-term prosperity, or at the very least, the opportunity to somewhat thrive in your life and not just live it, is going to be out of reach. So that was one thing that really stood out to me. What do you think about his comments, especially this notion of moving people from one county to the other, where he would like to see a Colorado law put in place that local governments cannot move a homeless individual from one area to the other without that destination community giving permission. And I asked Mayor Coffman about what about if they're originally from another jurisdiction. So let's say they come from Aurora to Douglas County, and then Douglas County says, we're going to move you back into Aurora. How about that scenario? And I think this is one thing that would need a bit more thought in that regard, but he made the point about sort of a fiction. What's the intent and the notion of determining where that person originally came from. And I do think it may be a little more complicated than you think, especially if these individuals are transients. Transient in nature in that they're moving from place to place. And the last place they were in was Aurora. And then they go into Douglas County, and Dougco said, oh, you were just in Aurora, so we're going to send you to Aurora. I'm just spitballing a scenario here. But I do think that he did raise an important point that maybe there's a little bit more to it than just, oh, we can ascertain easily where this person came from. And then, of course, you have the legal issues of how do you transport them, under what basis do you bring them to another community, so on and so forth. 303-696-1971 is our telephone number. You can text into the show as well if you'd like to do that method. Bill, I wanted to get your reaction for a moment on this interview with Mayor Coffman, because we were talking about it during the break, and I think we hit on something important, that there's a lot of value in actually going and showing up someplace and doing that kind of diligent homework in the way Mayor Coffman has done, that maybe you should have done more of as a member of Congress. We should see others do in government as well.
Yeah, there's something that I've talked with George behind the scenes for a number of months, and it's something I go back to in my core learning in journalism in college. And it's something that I think that journalists miss, and I think that Mayor Coffman has identified very keenly. And the story, the basic premise is this. If you are a journalist in school, they said, okay, outside the door to your room right now, right outside that door over my shoulder, if you're looking on YouTube, outside that door, one person or one group of people tells you there's a wild pack of bears that is running rampant and trying to attack everybody. And then another group says, no, outside that door is actually a wild mob, and they have pitchforks and torches, and they're calling for blood. And so you have the two stories. Now, as a journalist, it is your responsibility to walk out that door and look.
Right.
That's journalism.
I've heard you say this, too.
It's not talking about both sides. It's going and looking, and that's why I appreciate Mayor Coffman. He heard stories from both sides about what was going on the streets. And then he went and looked. That's the issue. People wonder on the left, why are we mad that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris haven't gone down to the border? Because they haven't taken the time to look. That's where I appreciate Coffman. He heard the stories, and then he went and looked. And I wish we would have more people in power. I wish we would have more people that would pretend that they're journalists, understand that core principle. That's how you do the work.
Now, of course, personal experience will only show you so much, because that's the vision of what do you notice, but that can help you to get a better lens to assess the data, or to assess what organizations are providing. Exactly. It'll give you context. And I think that that's utterly lacking among elected officials at all levels of government. They're not actually doing the work. I love that you brought up Biden and Harris never going to the southern border to actually survey the situation on the ground. That actually is kind of important. Yes, do some Republicans go to the border so they can have a publicity stunt and say, I'm at the border and this is all messed up? Yes. But even if they're doing that, or if they are sincere, they are actually getting the opportunity to learn what's happening on the ground, providing additional context for the data, for the testimony that's offered before Congress. So in Mike Coffman's case, when you have a homeless support organization that comes and testifies before the city council, and he's sitting there, he knows more questions that he can ask to better assess the situation from what's being presented in the testimony.
Yeah, I was told early on in my radio career to never, ever trust a manager that can't do your job, because that's a manager that will not know how to manage you. And that's kind of what I see with too many of our elected officials at times. They spend a lot of time reading papers and going to meetings and talking to people rather than getting the fingernails dirty. There's a popular program, Mike Rowe, Dirty Jobs. He goes out and does the dirty job. And that's what I would like to see. And now I'm not saying that every member of Congress, in order to look at either the border or to look at the homeless issue, needs to pretend to be homeless or an illegal immigrant for a while. But at least go down and talk to the people that are getting their fingernails dirty. One of the things that I will throw rocks at the Biden administration for over and over again, and going back to the border, is they're ignoring the information they are getting from the customs officials. They're ignoring, in my opinion, that information. That is valuable information. Why they are not having monthly, or at least bi-monthly meetings with them and say, what do you see? How can we help? And figure out, what are the people that are getting their fingernails dirty? What do they see? Trust them because they're doing the work.
Right. I think it's well said. Alexa texting in part saying Colorado cities need to look at other cities which have reduced the homeless problem without throwing more money at it. Are there any successful government programs which eventually reduce spending? I think that's something Coffman was really getting at and looking at what Colorado Springs is doing. I think in terms of the city working in partnership with some of the homeless support organizations. He mentioned the Bridge House down in Colorado Springs as one particular example. And that's the kind of mindset you need to have. What's working, what works efficiently, what saves taxpayers money, and what actually helps the people who need to be helped, as opposed to, let's just throw money at the problem and see what sticks.
And it's just like the Bridge House. I'm glad you brought that up because, a friend of the show and sponsor, Step Denver. What are the things that Mike Kaufman talked about with the Bridge House working? Oh, oddly enough, 2 things. He talked about 1 being sobriety, 2 being work. Those were the 2 things that he hung his hat on.
Yes.
Wow. We have a program here that has some really, really solid success by doing those 2 things. Maybe we can learn something from that, but we're talking about government. I'm not going to hold my breath to think that they're going to learn anything.
Yeah, at least there are some who seem to be learning. You see, this is the thing about the local level, Billy, is that you actually have an opportunity to interface with officials, for them to be sort of pushed into the position where they either have to do a little bit more homework when a real significant issue comes up, or they decide it's best for them and for their community. They decide to take that kind of initiative. It's a different dynamic locally than what you can get from, say, something statewide or national. Final thought.
You're absolutely right. And that's one of the things that I appreciate Mike Coffman and what he's been able to do as the Aurora mayor. I have to be perfectly honest. When I first saw Mike Coffman running for Aurora mayor, I'm like, oh, I'm so sad. Because I'm like, oh, he has, I felt, he still had some time in Washington. He still had the ability to do other things. And then I'm like, oh, but he's going to be the mayor. And in all honesty, my first impression was, well, that's going to be a filler. He's going to be there and he's going to, cut ribbons and kiss babies and show up at grand openings, and he'll do the performative aspects. He has shocked me with how much of the detail-oriented work he has done. I am so proud of what he's been able to do in the city. It has been remarkable, and I wish we would have more mayors that were that nuts and bolts at times, because I think we have some other mayors that that are more about the performative side of things, and doing the publicity work than doing the harder
And
work.
what's interesting is the mayor technically doesn't have power in Aurora.
Yeah.
But he's able to sort of throw his weight around in these positive and influential ways. And I think that comes from the fact that he was in Congress for so long. He was in the state legislature earlier on. He'd been Secretary of State and Treasurer for Colorado. He's done almost every position that you can imagine in state and national government pretty much, and elected position. And when you are somebody like that and you go into the mayoral position where you don't really have direct power, you want to be involved in the nuts and bolts as much as possible. You don't want to just sit back and bask in the whatever supposed glow you might get. You actually want to be hands-on because that's what you're used to and that's the mindset you bring, and that's definitely what Mike Coffman has always done. That's where I thought early on it was interesting for him to decide to go to become mayor, to run for mayor, because I know he is somebody who wants to do things as opposed to get things done, as opposed to just being someone who gets the PR. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler. We're going to keep the discussion going. 303-696-1971 is our telephone number. We've got a long text that came in that I think looks like a good one. We will jump on to 710 KNUS app on your smartphone and 303-696-1971. Again, our telephone number. Jimmy in for George on News Talk 710 KNUS. This is apropos. Gimme Shelter by the Rolling Stones, bringing us back as we talk about homelessness. And we spoke earlier with Aurora Mayor Mike Coffman about it and got some really good insights in that conversation. If you missed it, check out the podcast. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, in for George Brauchler, right here on News Talk 710 KNUS. Of course, I host the Jimmy Sengenberger Show every Saturday morning from 6 to 9 here on 710 KNUS. Listener text. While I'm empathetic to the plight of the homeless, for those who truly don't have a home, I don't think another law needs to be enacted to tell county cities at all what to do with their homeless issues. It's still a crime, vagrancy. Most homeless use drugs of all sorts, and based on data out of Douglas, about 75% have a home. By the way, I just asked the listener if he had a source for this. I'm going to need to check in on this again, but he said Kevin Duffy, chief at the DCSO, has been keeping data, and I think he said this at the last hearing. We're going to check on that. I want to see if I can confirm that, because I heard it mentioned yesterday on the show when George was hosting, and I'm not sure. I need to see that for myself, because that's hard for me to think you can really track and ascertain. Maybe you could say that about, say, panhandlers, but how you would even determine that number, I don't know. But the listener's text goes on. They just come here to beg and then go back home. Legalized weed also played a huge role in changing our landscape, so there is that. So I think there are some true points here. I'm going to check into the data and whether that's panhandlers or the homeless themselves. But in terms of drugs, that definitely, we heard Mayor Kaufman talk about how drugs are a driving issue, especially for those who live in the encampments, who sort of end up on the streets more consistently. That is one big driving reason, the biggest, he would say, and did say before. In terms of vagrancy, I mean, there are people who end up down on their luck who are in these sorts of positions, and I don't know that you can simply just throw the criminal law at somebody and say, we're simply going to arrest you because you were homeless. I think you got to be a little more cautious in that regard. But I do think you got a point here when you say, I don't think another law needs to be enacted to tell counties, cities, etc., what to do with homeless issues. Work it out among communities. Figure out solutions that you can work with together. It is an important issue. It's not going anywhere, nor are we. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, in for George Brauchler. Hour number 3 is up ahead in the 4th hour. 9 o'clock hour, we'll be joined by 2 Iranian Americans who came here from Iran in the past several decades. We're going to get a real good perspective on what's happening in Iran with their protests now. Jimmy in for George. Keep it right here, 710 KNUS. Time now for the third hour. Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler this morning. A News Talk 710 KNUS. Of course, I do host the Jimmy Sengenberger Show every Saturday morning from 6 to 9 here on News Talk 710 KNUS. Great to be with you on this, the day that is 10 days before Christmas Eve, if you can believe it. And I can't. We're almost through 2022. I know it's cliche, but my mind is still a little bit blown about that. But it's great to be with you on this December 14th. 303-696-1971 is our telephone number if you'd like to join in to the festivities. You can also text into the show on the 710 KNUS app on your smartphone. If you don't have it, what are you doing? Download the app today. You can access podcasts, contests, and much more, plus text into the show. There's also Twitter. I am on the Twitterverse, in the Twitterverse, I don't know, whatever it is. @Sang Center is my Twitter handle. That's Sang with an E, not an A, Center on Twitter. And you can also email yours truly directly via 710knus.com and go to the Jimmy Sengenberger Show page, because that's how you get it directly to me. And you can also email me via my website, jimmysengenberger.com. Keep in mind, it's all E's all the time in Sengenberger. Good to be with you today, and good to talk about the many issues that we have on our plate. I mean, it is one of the things in media. I'm a columnist twice a week, a radio host. George is a host and a columnist. We never have a shortage of things to talk about. That's one of the remarkable things about this time. And even social media itself provides ample points of discussion. Elon Musk purchased Twitter. He first announced it in, I think April of this year, and I was filling in right here for George. Bill Thorpe was behind the glass, and we were wondering, was this actually going to happen? Was this really going to take shape? Would he finalize the purchase? And he did. And now a whole lot of stuff has happened. We've had the Twitter files and the revelations of the Biden campaign trying to get certain stories related to Hunter Biden and his laptop removed. You had the developments that the government agencies, the FBI and Department of Homeland Security, were regularly having meetings and gave with Twitter, Facebook, and so forth, and gave tips to them about stuff that could come regarding Hunter Biden and what have you. I mean, there's a lot that we've learned in that regard from the Twitter files over the last week and a half and their release. But there's also just the general discussion about free speech on Twitter and how to handle that, and Elon Musk getting the left all in a tizzy. And there's a perception that they're trying to express that Elon Musk wants to sort of force now people to see certain views in a way that, as one columnist at The Atlantic discussed on MSNBC, is akin to forcing a bookstore to display a book. Take a listen to this from Adam Sewer.
Twitter is a private company. Elon Musk can do what he wants with it. But before, when it was not owned by Elon Musk, they wanted to use the power of the state to control what you could say on Twitter, or to tell Twitter what their editorial policies were allowed to be. And to look at it sort of metaphorically, it's like saying, bookstores decide what kind of books they want to carry all the time. And this is sort of like, these laws are sort of like saying, well, you have to carry these books. You have to put, Don Trump Jr.'s book in the front display window. You have to promote his speech. You can't make your own decision about what speech is valuable or should be promoted, because they fundamentally do not believe that if you are saying something they don't want you to say, that you have the same right to free speech that they do.
What? That comparison was Utterly nonsensical. On the one hand, we are told, and I agree with this perception, by the way, that social media platforms are not publishers. They're different in how they operate. Publishers have much more intimate engagement in what is allowed and what isn't allowed. Similarly with a bookstore. A bookstore determines what books they want to sell or don't want to sell. They have that ability. They can decide on the display, so on and so forth. Similar to a publisher. They're deciding which ones get and make those decisions intimately. Versus social media platforms, which are supposed to be involved only insofar as they set certain standards and they want to enforce those standards. Now, do they go beyond? Perhaps. Yeah. I mean, we've seen that with the revelations coming out of the Twitter files, insofar as we're learning more and more about requests for censorship and the government saying, hey, we think you should block this or watch out for this particular content or push up this kind of content. I mean, that's something that Jen Psaki, the former White House press secretary, said back in February of this year when she was still in the White House, where she was making the point that they were talking with social media companies saying, we want, insofar as it concerns COVID, certain content to be pushed down and other content to be pushed up. Very explicit about that. So this bookstore analogy is ludicrous. I mean, if a platform is intended to allow people to say what they want to say, then of course you should allow that within some standards. Making that kind of equivalency to a bookstore or to a publisher, to me, doesn't fit in any way, shape, or form. It's a very poor analogy, and people aren't being forced to see particular content. You can, by the way, you can block. If you don't like somebody and what they say, you can block them or you can mute them so that you aren't exposed to their content on Twitter. But then it got even more interesting when you had Joy Reid over on MSNBC saying that Elon Musk and the right want to manipulate language.
I mean, they feel like they need to manipulate language, as you said, force Don Jr.'s book to the front of the bookstore because nobody wants to buy it and nobody wants to hear it. And this idea of trying to control language itself. Because Cheryl Eiffel highlighted one of these other tweets where Elon Musk, who is a child of a apartheid era South Africa, twisted the meaning of truth and reconciliation. And she says it's deliberate. A white guy raised in apartheid-era South Africa with no anti-apartheid bona fides to his name, co-opts, misstates, and distorts the concept of racial accountability in South Africa for his right-wing fantastical ends. They're just words to him because he wrote truth brings reconciliation. It's the same thing that Christopher Rufo did with critical race theory. I mean, he bragged about not knowing what it is, but said, I want, whenever people hear critical race theory, for them to think anti-white. We want them to think these horrible things, and I just want it to have a bad association. I don't care what it means. It feels like this is now Elon Musk's purpose for Twitter, to just change the meaning of free speech to, you have to let me harass you.
What? How ludicrous are these people? And this is because he put out a tweet that said truth brings reconciliation. She talks about trying to control language. Folks, here is a headline, Fox News from yesterday. You want to talk about controlling language? Cambridge Dictionary changes definition of man and woman. 1984 wasn't supposed to be a how-to manual, they have in quotes. Here's the lead. Cambridge Dictionary is being criticized by conservatives on social media for altering the definitions of the words man and woman to include people who identify as a gender other than their biological sex. The definition of woman, which previously represented the long-standing view on sex, now states that a woman is, quote, an adult who lives and identifies as female, though they may have been said to have a different sex at birth. Similarly, a man is now defined as, quote, an adult who lives and identifies as male, though they may have been said to have a different sex at birth. And of course, they talk about the pushback that this change has meant. Let's talk about The idea of trying to control language it is audacious coming from somebody on the left like Joy Reid to make such a claim when they are the ones who have been changing and trying to control language for real now in a dictionary. What do people reference when they give a definition? They reference a dictionary. The dictionary is seen as the definitive source for defining words. And this is what they're doing now in changing the definition of man and woman to basically make it where it's determined by the individual. That's hard to really see as a definitive definition. And isn't it a little bit circular? An adult who lives and identifies as male, though they may have been said to have a different sex at birth. So if you say that you are a man and you have to look for that definition, it's a little bit circular in the definition. But trying to control language because he's talking about free speech. Come on. 303-696-1971. Let's go to Robert in Littleton. Robert, you're on with Jimmy and for George. Good morning.
Hey, good morning, Jimmy. Just wanted to kind of weigh in on the this absolute goof in that, yes, they were trying to force speech on people and they were trying to control speech, but the they is the left wing of America.
Yes.
For years, and I guess this is really what bothers me, for years the left had basically a stranglehold on what was allowed to be put out on Twitter. And as we see the release of the Twitter files and all of the internal communications, it was pretty obvious that they had a concerted effort to either promote or not promote things that comported with their political ideology.
Yes.
And as well as a concerted effort to shut down people who would tweet or say, whatever you want to call it, anything that they didn't agree with or that they personally found offensive. And I think for at least the last 5 or 6 years, what I have heard from conservatives, Republicans, whether it be in the media or in Congress or anything else, was, hey, you know what? Whatever your standards are, that's fine. Enforce them equally across the board. If you say X, Y, and Z cannot, under any circumstances, be published or put out on Twitter, that's fine. But nobody gets to put out X, Y, and Z. Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter left that person. And that was the problem, is that conservatives on Twitter would say something and would be relentlessly harassed, called all manner of vile names, accused of the worst possible things that a human being could ever be accused of, called Nazis and fascists and, child predators and rapists and this, that, and the other. And that was perfectly okay with Yoel Roth and this other crew of misfits at Twitter. All Elon Musk has said, or done, is said, hey, what's good for the goose is good for the gander.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to put it out there, that's cool, but you got to be expected, you have to expect, rather, to get it back.
Right.
And the standards will be applied across the board in the same even-handed fashion. And if you don't like what you hear, go away. And this is something, I've said for years when people talk about, well, we should, ban this book or this radio show or this TV show or this movie or this song or whatever it happens to be. Hey, if you don't like it, change the freaking channel, man. There's 1,000 radio stations and 1,000 television stations. Better yet, turn it off and go read a book. If you don't like what that book says, don't check it out at the library. Don't buy it. People have this uber-sensitive, hyper-inflated sense of their own self-importance and think that their standards, whatever those standards may be, should be applied to everyone else because I don't like it or because my little feelings were hurt. Jesus, man, grow up, put your big boy pants or your big girl pants on, act like an adult, and do something with your life instead of being a professional victim.
Robert, I think that's so well put and very true about Twitter. I love that analogy of good for the goose is good for the gander because it really fits. But here's something that you do see, and we see this a little bit on the left, but more pronounced lately. You do have some on the right who want to remove certain books. They want to ban certain books, particularly from school libraries. How do you think that comports with the perspective you're expressing that conservatives are sharing vis-a-vis social media? Is there a difference between that? Is there something similar? What do you see?
I think it depends on the context of it, because I'm old enough to remember when Catcher in the Rye was not supposed to be in school libraries, because of the imagery that was expressed within it.
Right.
I remember a time when people said that, oh God, now I can't think of the darn book, Boo Radley, come on, man, you got to shake my brain loose here. Shouldn't have been in public schools.
Kill the Mockingbird. Kill a Mockingbird. To kill a Mockingbird.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I just had a brain fart this morning. But because of the imagery and the ideas that were expressed in it, that it wasn't appropriate for children. And I understand that there needs to be a certain level of moderation, especially as it pertains to like school libraries, where we're talking about young kids that I don't think a 7 or an 8-year-old needs to be subjected to or even have available to them imagery of violence, of racism, of anything sexual in nature. They're kids. They're little kids. They shouldn't have that shoved in their face or even available to them on a regular basis, right, or on a ready basis, I should say. But at the same time, then it's such a slippery slope with speech, because when you say, okay, well, this person, because they're expressing racist views, okay, just pick a person, whoever, because they're expressing racist views, they should not have a platform.
Mm-hmm.
Generally speaking, most people would say, yeah, that's a good idea, right? Here's the problem. When you ban the guy who's expressing racist views, next you're going to ban the guy that's expressing, anti-white views. And then you're going to ban the guy that expresses, hey, just think for yourself views. That slope gets slippery in a hurry, and it's very, very steep on the downhill
you hit on something important, Robert, which is about context. Sure, I think especially in a school context that's important, but what about determining the context on social media platforms? Does it matter in that regard, or does the school setting, is that the overriding context? It's the platform or the venue, the vehicle that you were talking about, because there is context that people could say, oh, we have a rise in anti-Semitism and acts of hatred against Jewish people in our society. We see that today. So is that context a context through which a platform like Twitter could say, we are going to remove anybody who makes any sort of allusion that is anti-Semitic or what have you? Is that context? And how do you define some of these terms and what's appropriate or not for schools, for social media, what have you, like sexual, and how do you define the age for little kids and so forth? I mean, a lot of this, doesn't it get to the devil is in the details when you're talking about social media and or books in schools?
Yeah, it really does, and I think we throw around this word context as if it were the perfect descriptor of all things. And look, people that are smarter than I am are going to have to figure this one out. But I think that schools are a far different venue than Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or any of the other social media platforms. Do kids have access to those? Of course they do. Anybody with a phone's got access to it. That having been said, if you are going to have a social media platform as basically a bastion of free speech, free discussion, the exchange of ideas, the ability to debate, or in many cases, just call somebody stupid, you start restricting that, and again, that slippery slope kicks in. We say, okay, there's a rise in anti-Semitism or a rise in racially motivated crime or whatever. Okay, well, how do you make the corollary link between that and what some goofball from Podunk, Iowa, said on Twitter at 8:30 in the morning on a Wednesday?
Sure.
If this guy came out and said, "Hey, I'm going to go shoot up a synagogue today," okay, hey man, we've got something tangible there. this is actionable. This is something that should be acted upon. And not only should that post or tweet or whatever be removed, but that person should be looked at pretty darn hard by law enforcement and whatever their jurisdiction
Yes.
is. But if you have somebody that says, I think this sounds horrible coming out of my own mouth. I think Jews are, greedy. Okay, is that sorry, I almost let an expletive fly there. Is that a crappy thing to say? Yes, of course it's a crappy thing
It's wrong,
to say.
fundamentally. But should it be removed from a platform like that? I see what you mean. That's
what I'm saying.
You're bringing some nuance to this sort of discussion. And I think that is something that's very hard to get here in this point in time. Robert, I got to run to a break. We got a guest coming up at the bottom of the hour. Very interesting call and thoughts there. I do appreciate it. And a little bit of nuance this morning as well in the discussion of free speech. Thank you so much. 303-696-1971, our telephone number. When we come back, John Berlau. He's a senior fellow and director of finance policy at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. He's going to join us for a segment to pick up on that FTX conversation from earlier in the program. Again, this former CEO and the founder of FTX, the cryptocurrency firm, his name is Sam Bankman-Fried. He was arrested, and that precluded him from testifying before Congress yesterday. What are some takeaways as far as the regulatory side and more? We'll talk about that as we continue here on News Talk 710 KNUS. Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler. John Berlau joining us next. Stay with us. Good morning. Jimmy Sengenberger filling in for George Brauchler today. News Talk 710 KNUS also getting the experience of the cameras being in here. A little different hosting radio when you know you're being watched. They're not supposed to see your face. But alas, now you can. The 710 KNUS YouTube channel, youtube.com/@710KNUS, 710KNUS.com. Good to be with you today. Earlier in the program, in the first hour, we spent time talking about the latest developments on FTX, this cryptocurrency firm that is going bankrupt, multi-billion-dollar company. And we learned in congressional testimony yesterday from the guy who took over as CEO from Sam Bankman-Fried, who was just arrested, by the way. He was supposed to testify before Congress as well, and ended up not doing so because he was arrested in the Bahamas, charged with criminal fraud and conspiracy. And this is something that one listener, I think, aptly described as con job Ponzi scheme. And in testimony yesterday, John Ray, the now CEO of FTX, who formerly oversaw Enron during that whole debacle, had some disturbing insights to offer in his testimony yesterday.
The FTX group is unusual in the sense that, I've done probably a dozen large, scale bankruptcies over my career, including Enron, of course. Every one of those entities had some financial problem or another. They have some characteristics that are in common. This one is unusual, and it's unusual in the sense that literally, there's no record keeping whatsoever. It's in the absence of record keeping. Employees would communicate, invoicing and expenses on Slack, which is, essentially a way of communicating for chat rooms. They use QuickBooks, a multi-billion-dollar company using QuickBooks. QuickBooks. Nothing against QuickBooks, very nice tool, just not for a multi-billion-dollar company.
Nor should a company that is multi-billion dollars, or any company for that matter, approve expense reports via text with emojis. Let's talk about what's going on here, and particularly some of the interesting regulatory aspects and potential regulatory aspects that are implicated in this situation with John Berlau. He is a senior fellow and director of finance policy at the Competitive Enterprise Institute, as well as an expert on cryptocurrency policy. Good morning, John. Welcome to the show. Thanks so much for coming on.
Well, Jimmy, thanks so much for having me on.
Testimony will continue in hearings in Congress over this whole debacle. Can you, though, try and explain for us, because, look, I am still trying, few years in, to really grasp the nature of cryptocurrency, but this story is more than just this ethereal notion of crypto. It implicates some traditional notions of fraud and Ponzi schemes and so forth. But can you succinctly sort of describe for us what we're looking at here with FTX, and then we'll get into ESG and some of these regulatory things you're writing about?
Well, there is a lot. You're right. There's a lot of traditional charges of fraud and embezzlement. There were, as John Ray said, it looks like yesterday. It looks like plain old embezzlement. The grand jury, upon Sam Bankman-Fried's arrest, charged SBF, as he's called, with 6 counts of fraud and 1 count of money laundering, including wire fraud, commodities fraud, and including the SEC and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. The SEC is the Securities and Exchange Commission. Actually also had civil suits on securities fraud and commodities fraud. So it just looked like, he was taking money from customer accounts to put sort of in his personal account as far as real estate, political donations, and crypto. Despite, the people, saying there's no regulation, it's not exempt from these laws. And that was what was proven yesterday.
So when you say not exempt from these laws, so there are some basic laws that still apply as far as maybe the business practices that they were operating under at this firm, even though crypto itself is not regulated per se. And of course, we don't have something like the FDIC to backfill anybody when their money goes kaput.
Right. And we really don't want that. We really don't want to have crypto bailouts and too big to fail and the problems with Lehman Brothers and everything else, in my opinion. And yeah, but basically nothing. I mean, whether you've got, Beanie Babies, computer software, or whatever, it's not exempt from basic, fraud and money laundering and other laws. Cryptocurrency exchanges have to register with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. And one of the problems is the lack of clarity in regulations, that the SEC is saying some cryptocurrencies are securities, but not others. And if they're so big as Bitcoin and Ethereum, you may not be securities, but others would be, even though these really don't fit in the regular securities framework and they don't pay dividends. The ironic thing about the SEC suit was it charged it with defrauding its shareholders, but didn't make the claim as before the cryptocurrencies itself were securities. But this, for all the talk about how this is a totally unregulated sector, I mean, this showed yesterday there are plenty of laws that applied and laws that could have, done before when people were warning about FTX.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point, especially something that has been lost in the discussion, because we're looking, I think, at one category of regulations, when really what's implicated here more than anything else that can actually address things legally in this moment is this other category, as far as how firms like this are supposed to operate when they are taking investment cash and what they're doing and so forth. Again, we are talking with John Berlau. He is Senior Fellow and Director of Finance at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. One thing that the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, has pursued, and you've written about this for Competitive Enterprise Institute, John, is this notion of environmental, social, and governance mandates, ESG mandates. And that's something where what you describe as legitimate cryptocurrencies, such as XRP and LBRY, are being treated in a way that's arbitrary in terms of enforcement action. They're not implicating fraud. These are situations where you have different things being done in cryptocurrency space that are not fraud, but yet the SEC is cracking down because of, and we see this in the corporate world broadly, environmental, social, and governance principles and mandates. What is that ESG, and how is that concerning to you vis-a-vis crypto right now?
Well, yes, Sam Bankman-Fried tried to wrap himself in ESG. In fact, he tried to promote core. He tried to talk about how carbon-friendly, carbon-neutral FTX was, and lured some people to the platform. Also, was sort of bashing some of the more established coins like Bitcoin for using too much energy, and promoting some of the newer coins that he said were more carbon friendly, which really people may have lost. Also another way he was having some of his customers lose money, which I'm going to be writing more about at CEI.org. But anyway, I followed the SEC just for going after things, losing sight of their mandate of, detecting and investigating fraud. There were warnings about FTX from short sellers such as Mark Cahodes, but instead they were trying to make just general corporations disclose, how green they were, which was subjective with ESG, and also going after, like I said, with the securities regulation, XRP, which is like the third or fourth largest crypto in the world, used in a lot of other countries, not for fraud allegations, but because it was not a security, even though they had met with the SEC and it said it was fine, and the SEC would arbitrarily decide this. So I mean, they need to go after fraud in the securities market, and when they can in the crypto market, and otherwise just write clear rules that don't hurt either investor opportunity or legitimate entrepreneurs, the same as the Sarbanes-Oxley overkill did in the wake of the Enron scandal. It hurt a lot of legitimate smaller companies trying to go public without really doing much to fight fraud.
Couple minutes left with our guest, John Berlau of the Competitive Enterprise Institute. So let me just clarify something, make sure I'm understanding right. So what you're contending, John, is that the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, has been going after corporations, a variety of different industries, but including corporations and cryptocurrencies that are in the crypto space, over these environmental, social, and governance mandates and principles, focusing on that on the one hand. On the other hand, you have Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX that are playing the game on ESG. They're donating to Democrats as well, being the second largest donor SBF was in this last election cycle to Democrats. They're talking the talk about the environment. They're saying we are keeping emissions down. We're doing this and that with our computers and so forth as far as energy usage. So while the SEC is focused on ESG, which doesn't implicate FTX and SBF because those guys are playing the game right, SBF and FTX are screwing around with fraud, allegedly, of course, and this conspiracy stuff. And so basically the SEC's eye is on the wrong ball. Is that right?
Yes, it's on a couple of wrong balls. It's on whether the cryptos are securities, not whether they're committing fraud and kind of exceeding its authority, and on making just general corporations disclose how green they are, subjective measurements of when it comes to climate and things like that, when they're clearly when it's clearly like relevant to all investors and financial performance, they should do that. But they're going beyond that. So they've been looking beyond fraud and basic disclosure for investors, and it's taken their eye off the ball. Exactly.
John Berlau, our guest. Just one final question: what are you going to be looking for in these hearings? Where do we go from here?
I'm going to be looking for more things as far as just getting to the bottom of this. How was this allowed to fester? As well as what are some ways we can focus on actual fraud and prevent this in the future, as well as things like updating the bankruptcy laws so people could get access to their money faster, things like that, things that would really help serve crypto holders and financial consumers.
Well, we'll be watching with great interest, and I'm sure we'll talk again down the line. John Berlau, Competitive Enterprise Institute's Director of Finance Policy. Thanks so much for joining us, and appreciate your time. Merry Christmas.
Thanks, same to you, and thanks so much. CEI.org is our website.
CEI.org. They definitely do some great work at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Good to be with you. Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler today. We're going to take a break. There's more on the other side, including top of the hour. We will have two Iranian Americans in studio to get a real good sense of what is happening in Iran right now as we speak with these historic, genuinely historic protests. Keep it right here. Don't go anywhere. News Talk 710 KNUS. Groove Mac, Jimmy Sengenberger here with you, filling in for George Brauchler this morning. On News Talk 710 KNUS, coming up at the top of the hour, we will speak here in studio with Babak, Behzadi, and Amir, Kayeni, who will both join us to talk about what is happening in their home country of Iran. We have seen genuinely historic protests in Iran recently, the largest since at least 2009. And there is an interesting piece a day or two ago from the Wall Street Journal by a couple of foreign policy experts on why Iran's protests could topple the regime. Do Babak and Amir believe that could be possible? What is happening on the ground in Iran? We will get some excellent insights coming up in the next hour when they join me here in studio. I want to talk about one other thing to wrap up the hour. I have a new column out for Colorado Politics today. You can also get it at denvergazette.com, entitled A Banquet of Consequences for Local Power Abusers. And you often think about the swamp in D.C. or what happens under the Golden Dome in Colorado when we see corruption, or we think about corruption, or we think about abuse of power in particular. But all too often, what we are increasingly seeing is abuse of power as a sort of epidemic locally, right here at Denver metro area. Think of Denver. Think of Aurora. In Aurora, take the story of Robin Niceta. She is the former Arapahoe County Child Protective Services official. She pled not guilty on Monday to criminal charges concerning a false sexual abuse report filed against Aurora City Councilwoman Danielle Jurinsky. Now, this is a dastardly tale. The allegations are stunning. And what Jurinsky went through earlier this year was just no parent should ever have to endure anything like what Danielle did when she was accused of sexually abusing her 2-year-old son. This is just horrifying. And there's implications here of a former Aurora police chief, Vanessa Wilson, who was Niceta's girlfriend at the time, calling, and particularly because Jurinsky had the day before the call was made in January to Child Protective Services, allegedly by Robin Niceta. Jurinsky went on to Stephen Tubbs' show here on KNUS and blasted the former police chief, then Chief Wilson, who was, again, Niceta's girlfriend at the time, and calling for her firing. So that whole story is, there are questions that Wilson needs to answer. There are disturbing aspects to, this whole story. And that seems to be a clear abuse of the system in Arapahoe County. Then I also talk about this in Denver Public Schools. Did you hear about former DPS, Denver Public Schools principal, Kimberly Grayson? She was investigated last year for allegations of misspending more than $175,000 on district-issued credit cards. She was the principal at Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Early College, and she spent the money on more than 2,400 items. This was reported first by the Denver Gazette. Nearly half of the money is unaccounted for and without receipts. So the credit card was taken from her, but eventually returned. And then in this past May, Grayson was briefly promoted to a district-level position until she was placed on administrative leave as more accusations came to light. So then her credit card got confiscated again. She ultimately resigned in August following an unrelated investigation at allegations she racially discriminated and retaliated against some DPS employees. And I'm just wondering, how in the world did a DPS principal get away with such abuses for so long, and what real-world consequences will she face for her malfeasance? But is it surprising that this would happen in DPS? When you look at the top, the example set from the top, where you see school board members like Tay Anderson and Scott Esserman abusing their positions of power, engaging in abuse of power, say in May of this year, holding a public meeting at Manual High School to berate an employee, an instructor for the JROTC program that was there at the time, accusing him wrongly, falsely, of causing the program to be moved to a different school from Manual, the JROTC program. Meanwhile, Gordon Crawford, the employee, is standing there having to take all of this. I spoke exclusively with Crawford in studio on my show Saturday. Check out the podcast from the 7 o'clock hour, the second hour on Saturday. 710knus.com. Go to the Jimmy Sengenberger show page for that. But it is horrible. These are just a few examples of abuses of power that need to be held into account. And as I write for Colorado Politics today, the Scottish novelist Robert Louis Stevenson once said, "Sooner or later, we all sit down to a banquet of consequences. From school leaders to government agency staff, local officials who abuse their power must unavoidably sit down at their own banquet of consequences." And by the way, folks, it is our job to make sure that happens. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we will talk with Amir and Babak, both immigrants from Iran, about what's happening in Iran right now with their historic protests. You don't want to miss this conversation. They'll be in studio next. Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler, 710 KNUS.
Want to take your favorite radio station wherever you go? Well, now there's an app for that. No matter where you are, stream your favorite shows. Tap the app to listen to podcasts. Talk back to your favorite local hosts.
At the tone, leave a message.
Call the show. Set your alarm. Enter contests and win prizes. All in the palm of your hand. Available now for iOS and Android devices in the App Store or Google Play. And best of all, it's free. Download today.
Where is the time gone? Fourth and final hour. Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler today. News Talk 710 KNUS. I will be back in the saddle this coming Saturday morning for the Jimmy Sengenberger Show from 6 to 9 in the morning. And among my guests will be Casper Stockham, who's running to be the next chairman of the Colorado Republican Party. He'll be joining me in studio to offer his case for being the next chairman of the party. It's good to be with you today. I always say that because it's true, but especially when we are able to talk about important topics and really get an eye into things that we're not otherwise able to get. I mean, when we hear about, say, protests in Iran, we may think, okay, so there's another little spurt of protests where they're resisting the government over some issue. We've seen it before. 2009 was, I think, the biggest one, or at least this is the biggest since 2009, if not bigger. 2017, 2019, we've seen these things, but a lot of times we don't understand what's going on. We're not hearing about it in the American press very much, especially locally. And it's important to talk about, and it's important to get an understanding of what's really happening on the ground and also what's happening here in our own communities as far as the Iranian American community speaking out on behalf of their friends, their family, their compatriots in Iran, the Iranian people who are speaking up and facing the wrath of the government. This hour, I am very pleased to be joined here in studio by two immigrants from Iran, Babak Behzadi and Amir Kayeni, both joining me now on the program. Gentlemen, it's good to have you here. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Thank you. We're going to see a little bit. We may have a little bit of a mic issue going on in here. We'll see. We're getting some feedback, so bear with me, or maybe. Yeah. So we're working on. We're going to work on that. There we go. I think Bill just identified the problem. It was one of the pairs of headphones that was just feedbacking up a little loud. So now we are good. Let me welcome once again Amir and Babak. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming in. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Jimmy.
I appreciate it.
I got connected with you, Amir, through my father, and both are realtors, and you spoke at I think a Christmas or holiday party recently. Yes. For and you had a conversation in which he was struck by you expressing how distraught or upset or surprised, whatever term you may want to use, Iranian Americans are right now about how little coverage there has been in U.S. media and locally to the plight of the Iranian people right now, the protests going on, and protests happening in our own community. Talk to me a little bit about that before we get into the issues and also the background of both of you gentlemen and your journeys to America and so forth. Why is it important that we have this conversation that we're having in this hour, Amir?
Well, it's a long story. Just to make it short, is basically there is like close to about almost 14,000 Iranian here in Colorado. And we've been here since 1978. Most of the old people that have been here. And every time there is any kind of news, there is always a lot of noise behind it going on and everything. And we were wondering what's going on here. This news is all over Europe, everywhere, and we get no noise or nothing about this, demonstration that we're doing for almost 8 weeks in front of Capitol. No TV station, no radio station, nothing, no news whatsoever. So it's kind of, it's upsetting that we're doing all this stuff to bring some knowledge to people to know what's going on in Iran, but nobody's interested. Looks like it, at least, from the outside of it when we look at it. So that's what I was talking about to your father at our meeting, and he says, well, my son is in a radio station. He might be interested. Sure enough, I guess you were interested enough to get us here.
Well, and so one thing, when you say about trying to build awareness, there have been protests that Iranian Americans have been holding downtown at the Capitol every Saturday.
Right, every Saturday for the last 6 weeks now.
Wow. And no coverage.
No
and
coverage.
And you've reached out to
Not
TV
even
stations
small,
and whatnot.
Small coverage. Nothing.
So I'm glad to be able to provide that today.
appreciate it.
So Amir, talk to me a little bit about your journey to America. When did you immigrate? How was that timing relative to when you had the revolution, when the radical Islamists took over?
Absolutely. I came here in 1977, end of 1977, and
so
revolution
just
happened.
before
Yes, it was like about 6 months before what happened in Iran. And there was a noise about, Shahs and stuff like that, but it wasn't really that serious when we left. But everything happened in 6 months, really, period, that all of a sudden everything was, going sour in Iran, and who knows what was happening. And it just basically, in a span of 6 months, it was turned over with the government, and all of a sudden, nobody knew anything about this guy Khomeini. And all of a sudden, he was in France, and two of the, his people that was working with him, I kind of brought back Khomeini to Iran, and it just started all from there. And
he became the first supreme leader.
Yes, they've been there for almost 44 years, 43 years old now, and people are being tired of it, and people are being getting in the street and talking from the beginning. It's not starting now, but it's been going on for 40 years at least. They went through the war with Iraq, and they couldn't do anything, and then economy went really bad and everything, and people are just sick and tired of it, but they can't do much. It's just like a secret. Everybody's unhappy, but nobody's allowed to talk about it, so nobody really can talk to each other to know what's going on.
Babak Behzadi, you came to the United States after the revolution. Talk to me about your background there.
I was 16 years old, 1984. I left the country. Revolution has happened, and slowly it's moving towards the conservatism and basically taking away all the modernization slowly. Barry Rubin wrote a book, Paved with Good Intentions, and he tried to, at that time, explain why people are running away from Iran. And he said, he tried to explain to the public, says, a fox was running from one city to another city, and they asked him, why are you running so fast? He says, in the city where I come from, they shoot any fox that has 3 gonads. They look, they said, well, you only have 2. He said, they shoot you first and they count. So 1984, that was the reason I left Iran, and I was a young guy, didn't know what to do. And I arrived in the United States, believe it or not, with 75 cents in my pocket.
Wow.
And
at 16 years old.
At 16 years of age, Rhode Island. And I went to high school, I went to pharmacy school there, and with a couple of years of, in the middle of it, I had to work. And the society provided what I needed, and I graduated and I moved on with my business. However, when I graduated in pharmacy school, my passion was always politics, and in graduate school I was taking foreign policy classes, and later in pharmacy, information technology, and
so this is a natural fit for you to really be speaking out. And you were in Berlin, where there was a massive protest of over 100,000 people protesting in support of the Iranian people just, a few weeks ago, a couple months ago?
About 3-4 weeks ago. So what it is, the Europeans tend to be a little bit more political, and they, clearly, their geography has changed over the years, so they're more political. And the Iranian diaspora in Europe is very strong. And about 120,000 people literally went into this demonstration. European Union, yesterday they announced that they're not going to even speak to any officials of Iran. United States needs to get there, although the administration has said that they will stand with the people of Iran, but standing is one thing and taking action is another.
Good point.
We need more actions from the administration.
So let's get to just a big picture of what has been happening on the ground. Amir, Kayeni, what can you tell us is taking place? Because we saw the very first thing was a 22-year-old young woman who refused to wear the hijab. She ended up dead.
Right.
And then what have we seen since then? Talk to us, because this is even more than just a hijab situation. Like, oh, there's a protest about wearing the hijab. There's something much more symbolic about saying we want the right for women to decide whether or not they want to wear the hijab, which seems pretty simple to us and straightforward to us in America.
Well, the brutality of Islamic Republic, of these mullahs, are out of control. They're killing people for just even speaking, or not wearing the right clothes, or they can't even get together and talk about anything. So these dictator people that there are on top of the government, they're killing, torturing, and raping people in the name of religion, just to be able to survive. And for me to talk about it, I don't want to talk about it in detail, but if I could tell you just in a simple way, is first you have to know that this destructive government of Iran is basically doesn't care for people anymore, and all they want to do is just to survive and be able to do whatever they want, and they're pulling a lot of money out of the country and everything, and they're sending it to different part of the world, and
particularly in a lot of cases in funding terrorist organizations.
Exactly. So it's basically for them to survive. They elect to do. They're using two methods of really keeping people silent and separate them. So the silence is what they really is. I guess their first method to kill people and to make sure that people do not get together and for any demonstration or anything like that, so to be able to control them, people. And when you're really looking at it, is want to give you one example, is basically they arrest these young people in a demonstration and they take them to jail, they torture them, they rape them, and they kill them, and they even bury them, and at the end they will call their family and they will tell them where the burial is. So that's, just to be able to survive, they are doing everything they can. It's been a matter of probably, I would say, about 3 months now that it's getting really, really bad. They're separating woman from the man, young from adult, court from farce, Arab from farce. They're just doing any form of separation that they can to keep people separated and silent. And it's time for us to get in the street, and people are getting in the street, and they're thinking that people are going to go away, but really people are not. They're maybe quiet for a couple of weeks, and they're coming back more strongly and doing it, the same. And the only thing they could find out to control these people are to kill them and make them silent.
Amir, Kayeni, and Babak Behzadi joining us here in the studio. Babak, you have been on an app called Clubhouse many times, as I understand it, where you have been speaking, you've been interacting with people who are in Iran. You're speaking in Farsi, talking with folks who are on the ground there, the Iranian people. What have you learned?
Honestly, the most important thing I've learned is that this generation is very progressive. Don't forget, the government is geriatric, right? They're religious with the rules and regulations of 1,300 years ago. Where the new generation, we call the TikTok generation, they are very progressive. They are very modern. They have access to, not recently, but they're internet users. So very modern generation. And the fear factor that the government has been ruling with for the last 43 years is basically gone. People are not afraid. Literally, the young generation of 16, 15 to 22, 23, they go in front of the paramilitary guys. Paramilitary is a crossbreed between Hell Angels and ISIS, basically, right, on motorcycles. And they're killing these guys. They literally open up their arms. They say, you can shoot us, but we're not going away. That is the thing. So the government has been living based on the fear factor. and the population and the young generation is not afraid of it. Besides that, the economy is such shambles that there's no future for this young generation. That is where the fear factor is not working anymore. If you take away the history, if you take away the present living of this young generation, and you don't have anything to offer to this young generation for future, they're not. That's why they go in front of bullets, and they're taking every risk they can to overthrow the government, and it has nothing to do with just hijab.
When you say overthrow the government, are you suggesting, Babak, that this is more of a revolution than just a protest movement?
Oh, absolutely. This is a full-blown revolution. This is a full-blown revolution.
Past administration, yeah.
Yeah, this is not something that, like in 2009, they were asking for, where's my vote? That's a civil request, where's my vote? In politics, we always say, if the government does not have a discourse, and if the population has a discourse and does not have a tie-down to economics of the government, you coming up with a explosive situation. Mm-hmm. Presently, we see that among the young generation. They have a discourse, Zan Zendegi Azadi, woman, life, freedom. I take it a step further and I say this is basically the same slogan that the Americans use, life, liberty, and pursuit of justice, pursuit of happiness. Yeah. In our case, when you say Zan, which is the woman, life, freedom, woman it's half of the population, gives birth to the other half of the population. So when the discourse captures the whole society from all different social economic layers of the society, that is something that nobody can confront. That is one thing. Second is, you're talking about life, basic life, because they are a modern generation. We call them TikTok generation. They see how other people live. Just like in China, you just had an issue with the COVID. The
lockdown.
Exactly.
They zero COVID policies.
And then they looked at the World Cup and they said, well, the rest of the world is living differently. Why are we under zero COVID? And thus you saw the demonstration. Well, this young generation of us also is the same. They're asking, well, people are living basic freedoms of life. This is basic universal human rights charter that they're looking for.
So is it in part, we got to go to a break here, but Babak, is it in part or largely because the technology allows this younger generation, particularly Gen Z, to see how the rest of the world lives and they recognize this isn't right. We should not be oppressed in the way that we are. We should have our rights, woman, life, freedom.
Absolutely. Look, the minute you are born from your mother, you are born with certain rights that no majority can take away. This is called the Western liberal democracies. I don't care how many percentage of vote you have. The minute you're born from your mother, you are born with certain rights.
The founding fathers of our country would call it natural rights.
Exactly.
The principle of natural rights that the framers of the Constitution firmly believed was true. We have to take a break. When we come back, we'll pick up the conversation, get a better understanding both of what's going on the ground in Iran right now, but also how we got to this point and evolved over the decades since 1979. Amir, Kayeni, and Babak Behzadi joining us here in studio. Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler. We'll take a break, be back with more on the other side. News Talk 710 KNUS. Good morning. Coming up on 9:30, Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler. On Denver's local talk leader, News Talk 710 KNUS, joined in studio by Amir, Kayeni, and Babak Behzadi, both Iranian immigrants. 1977, Amir came to America. In 1984, Babak joined us in this country, and we are so glad to have you and so many others who are Iranian Americans and Iranian immigrants, Iranian refugees in this land of freedom, which I hope, Babak, is helping to provide some inspiration for the young people in Iran who are speaking up now, and not just speaking up, who are leading what you've aptly defined as a revolution, more than just a protest, but a revolution in Iran.
Absolutely. I believe this is a full-blown revolution, and again, the young generation in Iran is asking for government to be changed because the government is incapable of changing. I mean, it's been given 43 years, 20 years of negotiations with the United States administrations, and they haven't gotten close to anything yet. So the young generation wants regime change. The young generation looks at the government and sees what the government is, and then they look at themselves. They say, we are what the Islamic Republic isn't. And when you see...
Let's be clear. We are what the Islamic Republic isn't. What does that mean?
So if Islamic Republic is not tolerant, if Islamic Republic is not embracive of all the socioeconomic people, women, men, religion, if Islamic Republic does not, although they're signatory of the Human Rights Charter, they're not even applying one of the articles of, never mind the 30 articles of the human rights, Universal Human Rights Charter. This generation says that is Islamic Republic. We are not Islamic Republic. We are plural. We are tolerant. We are. We want the human rights, basically the equality, and take the when they say woman, life, freedom means liberties, and basic liberties that comes with the human being. Basically.
So even on the ground there in Iran, the people are making a clear distinction between the government and themselves, the Iranian people, the majority of the Iranian people.
Absolutely. And sometimes you even hear it in administrations. In the last few years, different administrations, doesn't matter, Republican or Democrat, they try to put a little bit of space between the people and the government, right? They call it Islamic Republic, and we're the people of the Iran. So these two are completely different. And today, it's actually you see it even more in politics that they're not representing the Iranian people.
Even if you look at it at this World Cup that is happening, they even separate themselves from this soccer team of Iran, and they were protesting against this team not to go because they're kind of part of this the Islamic Republic. People in Iran are not calling it this is our government. They call it Islamic Republic of Mullahs. It doesn't have anything to do with people of Iran. People of Iran are mostly educated, mostly young people that they're all right now living in Iran, and most of them are pro-West, modernization and all that stuff. But these mullahs are going back as far as the history goes. I don't know how many years ago.
So I have heard that this up-and-coming generation is the most pro-American generation.
Absolutely.
And that they see the United States as a force for good, right, and as a beacon of freedom that they're aspiring to, Amir.
Right. It's just unbelievable that how this young generation. I remember when we were young back home, we had no idea of what this revolution is about. And even the first one that we had when the Shah was there, it was just we were blinded going to the street. But this young generation are amazing of what they come up with, as far as their slogan, as far as what they are really showing the world, as far as the sign that they're showing the world. It's absolutely crazy, that they're going through this long distance to get their voice out to people. And they're shutting down all the social media in Iran.
Yeah.
And
the internet access.
And internet. I can't even call my family. They can't even call to each other to different cities to organize any demonstration or anything like that. So they're trying to silence and separate people as much as they can.
Babak, Amir said something very interesting in how back when the revolution happened in 1979, a lot of people in Iran had no clue what was going on, what it was about. But here, there seems to be a real sense of purpose among the young people. Speak to that, if you will, but also paint a picture. What really is going on? You've been participating in these clubhouse conversations, hundreds of people in Iran speaking in Farsi, talking about what's happening. In addition to that question, paint a picture of what is happening, what the people are enduring as they fight for freedom in their country.
So in a nutshell, if you look at 1979 revolution was a conservative movement backwards, right? So for the last 43 years, we see that discrimination across the board in Iran, specifically to the woman. Islamic Republic stands on three pillars, right? Anti-Westernizations, with de facto to Israel, and hijab. Women, second citizens, besides other discriminations, but women half the population being discriminated, second citizen. Huh? So this has been going on and the women, to be honest with you, were the first group of Iranians within months of revolution. They spearheaded the anti-government demonstrations and uprising, simply because they were the worst discriminated against, and it continued. Now you see it you see uprisings in for other reasons too, but mainly the woman did this, and it came. Let's bring it fast forward to 3 months ago, when Mahsa Amini was beaten to death.
22-year-old.
22-year-old, right? And she did have a hijab. It just the morality police said it wasn't well enough covered. That was basically what we call the last straw that broke the camel's back. And if it happens to Mahsa Amini, it happens to other women. So population poured into the streets. I gotta say this: Shervin Hajipur wrote a poem and a song, and it took the world, and I mean the world, by surprise. And when you look at the song and the lyrics, it's basically text came from a young generation to each other. He put them together and created a beautiful, beautiful song. And when you look at those words, all you can see is just basic human rights, even environmental messages in there. The basic human rights that you see there, and that's what he was trying to say. And they actually arrested him, then they released him. He said, look, man, I just wrote a song. But when you look at that, and when you look at Zan Zendagi Azadi, woman, life, freedom, this is the discourse that this generation is moving forward with. This is the most amazing thing, pro-Western. Iranian young generation is very pro-Western as opposed to its government. So that's why we separate.
You say then that they firmly adopt the principle of natural rights, that as human beings, whether your government recognizes it or not, you as a human being have intrinsic fundamental rights.
Absolutely. If you look at the Iranian history, now you say, okay, we look at the region. Let's look at the region. Iran in 1909 had what they call the constitutional movement. And the constitutional movement at that time, it was copied from Belgium and France, and they created judiciary system, modern judiciary system, and they created the constitution for the first time with representative people. So Iranians are not new to the secularism. They're not new to the Western values. They've been had it for, as I say, two steps forward, one step back. And in 1979, it was a few steps back.
And in fact, I have seen pre-1979 photographs, Babak, of women
Absolutely.
who look like they're from California or anywhere in the United States.
Absolutely. We joke around. We say Iran is the only country that when you look at its past, it's like its future. Yeah. So they're very absolutely not only being Western, but at the same time, this movement is a patriotic movement too, because they're saying we're going to take Iran back. Who do you take Iran back from? they feel like they've been invaded, and believe it or not, this government, it doesn't care if it's people. You cannot look at the situation in Iran from the Western point of view. Islamic Republic of Iran does not care whether it finds its followers, if it's in Somalia, if it's in Lebanon, if it's Houthis in Yemen, and if it's within Iranian people. So perhaps 5% who have financial ties to the government are for the government, and I can strongly say 90 to 95% of people are against this government, and you see them on the streets actually embracing bullets.
So it's not just the young people who are leading the charge, it's older generations are on board.
Absolutely, but majority is, on the streets are the ones who literally run towards the bullets are the young generation.
Remarkable.
Right?
Well, the young generation don't remember that what happened in the first revolution when they took over Shah.
They weren't alive.
They weren't alive. And the old generation the old generation have seen time of Shah and how it was and everything. So when the young generation are in street and doing all this stuff, these old people that live in and they saw Shah's time, they remember how it was. It was in Shah's time, everything was just so freely given to people. I mean, the freedom, the basic human rights, was there. You could wear whatever you want. You could talk about whatever you want. You could gather around and you could socialize and do anything you want. But right now, when the old people see this, they're kind of in support of the young people. And the young people and the old people are getting together for this revolution.
There's something profound, Amir. I have noticed in Hong Kong, before and as the Chinese were subjugating the city of Hong Kong, decades earlier than they were supposed to, it was the young people that were leading the charge. When you look in China, it was predominantly the young people who helped lead to the end to the zero COVID policy in just the last few weeks, giving a real humiliation to their ruler, Xi Jinping, just weeks after he was installed as basically ruler for life in China. So there's something about the younger generation leading in these movements against these very oppressive regimes.
Well, it's absolutely the truth. And it just, look, what is the Islamic religion is doing in Iran? They're stepping back, okay? And all these young people are into the internet and seeing the modernization and freedom of other country. And then they come back to their own country and see what they're stepping back. So they're not going to tolerate this. The young people, that's why the young people are up front, because they are into internet. They're into the modernization. They see all this. They want it. Right. I mean, we can't deny them.
Say what you will. I like to bring up this point. There are a lot of changes going on as well in terms of modernization, progressiveness in that social context in Saudi Arabia, where you are seeing far more rights being provided to women that they've been denied for so long. And I understand there's the issue of the murder of Khashoggi and so forth, but Mohammed bin Salman is leading those efforts and actually had for the first time, I think last summer of 2021, a concert of boys, girls, men, women together, commingled, where Justin Bieber sang and stuff you would never hear of before. And it was a millennial who is Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince in Saudi Arabia, who's leading that charge. Now, is it the pace that we would like in the Western world? Absolutely not. But it is striking, I think, we got to go to a break, but Babak, feel free to chime in. It is striking that millennials and Gen Z in these Middle Eastern countries are leading in openness and in the expansion of rights, especially when it comes to women.
Let me put it in perspective. If and I know it will, this revolution happens in Iran, it will change the whole region. I think this is equal to bringing down the Berlin Wall. So that's how I would look at it.
Equal to bringing down the Berlin Wall. We're going to take a break. When we come back, I want to talk about this coming Saturday and the protests that have been happening outside the state capitol on Saturday afternoons, and also pose this question. Is it the case that Iran's protests or the revolution, as you say, that we are seeing could topple the regime? We'll pick up the conversation on that with Amir, Kayeni, and Babak Behzadi as we continue. Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler, News Talk 710 KNUS. Merry Christmas. Good to be with you. I'm wrapping up and winding down, filling in for George Brauchler today. Jimmy Sengenberger here with you. Deborah Flores in tomorrow. And then, of course, you got the Jimmy Sengenberger Show coming up 6 to 9 this Saturday morning, as is the case every Saturday, here on Denver's local talk leader, News Talk 710 KNUS, and we will do something of a sequel. I'm not sure what it's going to look like, but we'll do something in the 8 o'clock hour to continue our discussion this hour when we get to my show on Saturday with Amir, Kayeni, and Babak Behzadi, both Iranian immigrants to the United States. In Amir's case, 1977, Babak's case, 1984. And we've been talking about the protests in Iran that Babak has characterized, and Amir agreeing, that this is a revolution. It's much more than just a simple protest. Let me ask you a two-part question, as we're just about out of time. I'll start with you on this, Babak. Could these protests, this revolution, actually topple the Iranian regime, and what would you like the U.S. government to do?
Absolutely. This is a full-blown revolution, and U.S. government can certainly help, first of all, in helping to provide the internet. Second, continue the sanctions, targeted sanctions on the Islamic Republic of Iran. Third is the JCPOA cannot be signed. If they do sign it, they're basically providing billions of dollars to the Islamic Republic.
That's the Iranian nuclear deal.
That's the Iranian nuclear. The JCPOA is the Iranian nuclear deal, and that is billions of dollars providing to the Islamic Republic, not only to oppress and repress their own people, also in the proxy wars, killing American soldiers in Afghanistan and Iraq and other places, or funding Hezbollah of Lebanon. Fourth is, in my book, is look, the President Trump doesn't have Twitter account, and Supreme Leader has Twitter account, and he's not even sanctioned. Certainly he can be sanctioned on that. In addition to that, 5,000 of Iranian government officials' children literally living in the United States and the free world, where they are being oppressed, oppressing our people. In addition to that, I would say the lobbyists of Islamic Republic for 20 years, such as Nayak, has to go under investigation. Nayak has been funded, literally funded by the Islamic Republic indirectly, and they've been buzzing in the ears of the administrations, different administrations, where finally Obama came in and 3 weeks ago turned around and said President Obama came and said he made a mistake not supporting the Iranian people in 2009 uprising, simply because the influence of Nayak and other lobbyists of Islamic Republic here in the United States.
Yeah, I think he was very focused on getting the JCPOA, the Iranian nuclear deal, and Jimmy, so he didn't want to disrupt that.
In American history, supporting the Iranian people does not mean overthrowing the government. Overthrowing the government of Iran is in the hands of Iranian people. But in the history of the United States, let me go give you a little bit of trivia. In 1909 uprising, the Iranian constitutional movement, there was a young Harvard Baskerville from Kansas, a young American who is known as Lafayette of America in Iran, helped the Iranian revolutionaries to break the siege. So that's a trivia for you to look up.
What a fun story, and very profound. Amir, Kayeni, what would you have to add to what Babak just said? But also tell me a little bit about the Saturday protests. What's been going on? When are they taking place? Are all people welcome to participate if our listeners wanted to take time on Saturday afternoon to come out if it's not snowing?
Well, to add to what Babak was saying, as far as what we want the U.S. to do to help people of Iran, is I think a lot of people are saying the sanction wasn't really working, but I think absolutely the sanction was working. That's why we're here now. So because of the economy of Iran and everything, people are getting sick and tired of not having enough job, not having enough freedom to do anything they want. So I think the United States has to be emphasizing more sanction on Iran until this government gets to
and sanction the Supreme Leader himself, as Babak suggested.
Exactly. And as far as the protesting in Denver, we've been doing it for about 6 weeks now in front of Capitol. Anybody is welcome to it, and it's been happening from probably about 2 to about 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the afternoon every Saturday. So it's right in front of the Capitol. You can't miss it. There's so many people there, and we provide a lot of other stuff for as far as awareness of the public.
Yeah, information and so forth. Babak, I've got about 30 seconds for a final thought from you, sir. Maybe about the protests on Saturday.
Let me finish up with the beautiful Zan Zindagi Azadi, the slogan Zan Zindagi Azadi. That is the slogan and the discourse that the young generation of Iranians want, and I think
woman, life,
freedom, liberties, right? Woman, life, freedom, and I think we're going to. I know we're going to win. It's just, but it's going to take time, but we will win. Yeah. That's my take on it.
I love it. Well, Amir, Kayeni, and Babak Behzadi. We'll do something as a follow-up on Saturday morning, given that the protests will be happening again on Saturday. Thank you so much for taking the time. We'll keep in contact, and we will definitely on this station be keeping tabs on what's happening in Iran and make sure folks are aware.
Jimmy, I'm grateful for giving us the opportunity
to be
the voice of the Iranian people. Thank you very much. We appreciate this
time also, too, and it's just, it's amazing what you're doing. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's amazing what you both are doing, and all the Iranian people who are here in Denver, Colorado, in the United States, in the world, who are standing up for your friends, your family, your loved ones in Iran who are fighting for freedom. Woman, life, freedom. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, been in for George Brauchler. Have a great rest of the day. You got Deborah up at 3, Stefan up at 4. Merry Christmas. I'll be in for George next Wednesday again, actually. So tune in then. In the meantime, have a great one, and may God bless America.